Right. Let's get this all sorted out. Okie dokes. We've got a bunch of these running here. Okay, so about this chat, just got too many computers on here, just running these around. Well, good Abend. Assalamu alaikum to any of the Tommy Robinson fans who have got lost, and peace be with you, any Christian chaps up at this time, and shalom to the Mossad and everyone else. First and foremost, Mossad, how's my sound? Give me an F, an A, a 1, because obviously the echo bothers people. Nope, okay. A silence from the Mossad. Mossad says, shut up. An impromptu stream indeed. Well, sort of impromptu to me, evening, my man. Hey, Jamie. Sound is good. Okay, doke. So, I thought a series, a little bit of housekeeping. We're approaching our sort of like getting ready for some venture capital stage. So it's quite exciting. As part of that, I've also decided we need a artificial intelligence architecture and some fantastic works going on right now. We've kind of sealed our fantastic Uber model of everything for the data. And where I will be doing a bunch of streams on AI and politics, particularly on the AI architecture I'm proposing that's going to go into our slot, an ecosystem of artificial agents running around. We can talk about all that stuff as well. But instead of a ditty, I usually play a song, but we're not going to do that this evening. What we're going to do is, God's grace to you, John McDermott. Good evening, my man. What we're going to do is speak about a couple of things that are quite interesting. If you think of three huge threats to humanity, if you like, existential threats, they would be, of course, the climate. These are global problems. They face all of humanity. Ranked in the top three in any order you like will be the climate, the world's entire planet as an ecosystem. Clearly up there, it's a global threat. No national solution can solve it. Second, that will probably be equally ranked at the end of COVID, will be ending global pandemics. It looks like there's more mutations of the bugs. The bugs are coming, and other kind of bugs I deal with. And clearly the last letter signed by 350 of the world's leading AI researchers say AI is also a threat. All three of these threats are global. And given that the third one, particularly, I'm not an epidemiologist, and I'm old school, I read the weather by looking at the sky. So I'm not a meteorologist, but AI, we can speak about that. So I'm glad to be joined by a couple of whiz kids who are all into AI and stuff. Mossad, you'll be pleased to know that Israel is involved in our AI efforts. So of course, good for anything that's good for the Israeli economy. Mossad, like go team Israel. After all, Mossad runs the internet using the Internet Defense Force. So, be careful what you say, as you might get nuked by Mossad. And I thought, well, we've got to look at this. And why did I title this one Moloch, Misalignment, and Anti-Semitism? The third word seems to be strange. Why would I put anti-Semitism in the same place as the Moloch problem and misalignment? I'll tell you why, because ultimately all the AI models are built on learning language. Language is involved with speech. And what do you do with speech? Do you cancel people? Or cancel culture work? It doesn't look like cancel culture is going very far. People want hate speech. They want to speak freely. So what's the position on speech and hate speech? And just a few days ago, there was a fantastic expose on the position to take on speech and free speech by no other than one of my favorite comedians of all time in my generation, Rowan Atkinson, who just gave you a remarkable argument of how hate speech should be dealt with by more speech. The answer to hate speech is more speech. So, and as part of that, in the last few days, last week specifically, when I ran through the alt-right, I did a lot of social homophilic graph transformation algorithms in real time. All teams of the world unite. If you can play high-speed chess and hold many positions and many structures in your head, when you enter Telegram chat, you can either natter or you can actually run experimentation on the primates, which is what I tend to do. People think if I'm lurking in the chat, I'm just there to natter. I'm not. I'm really testing my algorithms like I test chess. And recently, given the work in AI, I've been kind of testing on two or three very large channels using my right-wing ID, and on one left channel, I can't share my left bring IDs with new chaps for obvious reasons, been testing the mirror symmetry of this in left-wing groups, and I found the results quite startling. So we're going to do that, but first, I think, first and foremost, let's get into this little speech. It's worth it. Then we're going to listen to something super, super good. So first and foremost, we're going to do a little bit of 1 minute of humor, because why not? Let's go see if I can find this. Bear with me a second, chaps. It won't be a minute. I wasn't really prepared for this. I just got back from dinner. So there we go. So what we can do is look at a Rowan Atkinson's first and a small 1 minute of comedy that's a classic. But the reason is this comedy was done at a time where free speech was allowed on public television. What would be considered racist speech or hate speech today was allowed on television. And its intention was to mock and satire hate itself. Rowan Atkinson being such a genius. So I wonder if both of you will pick up the two extremely bigoted jokes in this classic piece of comedy. And then we listen to the Rowan Atkinson speech, and then we're going to listen to something far more interesting. So let's see if I can find this one first. Right, of course, here we go. Bit of classic English comedy for you. Let's see if you pick up the two fantastic jokes, both of which would be banned if they were shown on the BBC today.
Shall we? This is called adding. If I have 2 beans, and then I add 2 more beans, what do I have?
Some beans.
Yes and no. Let's try again, shall we? I have 2 beans, then I add 2 more beans. What does that make?
A very small casserole.
Aldrich, the ape creatures of the Indus have mastered this. Now try again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So how many are there?
3.
What?
And that one.
3 and that one. So if I add that one to the 3, what will I have?
Oh, some beans.
Yes. To you, Baldrick, the Renaissance was just something that happened to other people, wasn't it?
Edmund, come quickly. The Queen wants to see you.
What?
Now, of course, you picked up both of those fantastic jokes, which would be not permissible today, Baldrick. The 8 creatures of the Indus Valley have mastered this. Of course, those familiar with fundamental history and archaeology will know the Indus Valley is the home to both Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, two of the oldest civilizations on Earth. And the 8 creatures of the Indus Valley was a lovely little racist joke that would be non-permitted ever. So for someone of the caliber, when I grew up in my generation, the Cambridge Four were everything, right? Footlights was everything. They produced some of the best comedy on the planet. So if there's someone who understands the issues of speech and the issues around free speech and hate speech, it would be no one other than, of course, Rowan Atkinson, because, you know, comedy is all about offending, right? Comedy is meant to be all about being funny and laughing at things and people. So let's have a listen to, before we jump into the AI part, how to deal with speech, remember, large language models, AI, speech, and the amazing Rowan Atkinson. Then we'll crack on to the heavier stuff, if that's all right.
Point when it comes to the consideration of any issue relating to free speech is my passionate belief that the second most precious thing in life is the right to express yourself freely. The most precious thing in life, I think, is food in your mouth. And the third most precious is a roof over your head. But a fixture for me in the number 2 slot is free expression, just below the need to sustain life itself. That is because I have enjoyed free expression in this country all my professional life and fully expect to continue to do so. Personally, I suspect highly unlikely to be arrested for whatever laws exist to contain free expression because of the undoubtedly privileged position that is afforded to those of a high public profile. So my concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile. Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay, or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult, or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen. When I heard of some of these more ludicrous offenses and charges, I remembered that I had been here before in a fictional context. I once did a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News some years ago, and we did a sketch where Griff Rhys-Jones played Constable Savage, a manifestly racist police officer to whom I, as his station commander, is giving a dressing down for arresting a black man on a whole string of ridiculous, trumped up and ludicrous charges. The charges for which Constable Savage arrested Mr. Winston Kadogo of 55 Mercer Road were these: walking on the cracks in the pavement, walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area during the hours of darkness, and one of my favorites, walking around all over the place. He was also arrested for urinating in a public convenience and looking at me in a funny way. Who would have thought that we would end up with a law that would allow life to imitate art so exactly? I read somewhere a defender of the status quo claiming that the fact that the gay horse case was dropped after the arrested man refused to pay the fine, and that the Scientology case was also dropped at some point during the court process, was proof that the law was working well, ignoring the fact that the only reason these cases were dropped was because of the publicity that they had attracted. The police sensed that ridicule was just around the corner and withdrew their actions. But what about the thousands of other cases that did not enjoy the oxygen of publicity, that weren't quite ludicrous enough to attract media attention? Even for those actions that were withdrawn, people were arrested, questioned, taken to court, and then released. You know, that isn't a law working properly. That is censoriousness of the most intimidating kind, guaranteed to have, as Lord Deer says, a chilling effect on free expression and free protest. Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights summarized, as you may know, this whole issue very well by saying, while arresting a protester for using threatening or abusive speech may, depending on the circumstances, be a proportionate response, we do not think that language or behavior that is merely insulting should ever be criminalized in this way. The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism is easily construed as insult by certain parties. Ridicule easily construed as insult. Sarcasm, unfavorable comparison, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. And because so many things can be interpreted as insult, it is hardly surprising that so many things have been, as the examples I talked about earlier show. Although the law under discussion has been on the statute book for over 25 years, it is indicative of a culture that has taken hold of the programs of successive governments, that with the reasonable and well-intentioned ambition to contain obnoxious elements in society, has created a society of an extraordinarily authoritarian and controlling nature. That is what you might call the new intolerance, a new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent. I am not intolerant, say many people, say many softly spoken, highly educated, liberal-minded people. I'm only intolerant of intolerance. And people tend to nod sagely and say, oh, yes, wise words, wise words. And yet, if you think about this supposedly inarguable statement for longer than 5 seconds, you realize that all it is advocating is the replacement of one kind of intolerance with another, which to me doesn't represent any kind of progress at all. Underlying prejudices, injustices, or resentments are not addressed by arresting people. They are addressed by the issues being aired, argued, and dealt with, preferably outside the legal process. For me, the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it. As with childhood diseases, you can better resist those germs to which you have been exposed. We need to build our immunity to taking offense so that we can deal with the issues that perfectly justified criticism can raise. Our priority should be to deal with the message, not the messenger. As President Obama said in an address to the United Nations only a month or so ago, laudable efforts to restrict speech can become a tool to silence critics or oppress minorities. The strongest weapon against hateful speech is not repression, it is more speech. And that's the essence of my thesis, more speech.
Just to pause there, the solution is not to be censorial. The solution is more speech, not hate speech. And good evening, Danny. Good evening, Britain. I will also speak of my t-shirt because part of my Spurgy audit has been wearing my Zionist shirt and then hoping to engage people in conversation in Berlin about this. And being an autiste, of course, I count everything as we do. And it was 71 interactions with my shirt for bearing form. And I'll more of that in a minute as Rowan Atkinson finishes the speech.
If we want a robust society, we need more robust dialogue, and that must include the right to insult or to offend. And even if, as Lord Deere says, the freedom to be inoffensive is no freedom at all. The repeal of this word in this clause will be only a small step, but it will, I hope, be a critical one in what should be a longer-term project to pause and slowly rewind the creeping culture of censoriousness. It is a small skirmish in the battle, in my opinion, to deal with what Sir Salman Rushdie refers to as the outrage industry. Self-appointed arbiters of the public good, encouraging media-stoked outrage to which the police feel under terrible pressure to react. A newspaper rings up Scotland Yard. Someone has said something slightly insulting on Twitter about someone who we think a national treasure. What are you going to do about it? And the police panic and they scrabble around and then grasp the most inappropriate lifeline of all, Section 5 of the Public Order Act, that thing where you can arrest anybody for saying anything that might be construed by anyone else as insulting. They don't seem to need a real victim. They need only to make the judgment that somebody could have been offended if they had heard or read what has been said, the most ludicrous degree of latitude. The storms that surround Twitter and Facebook comment have raised some fascinating issues about free speech, which we haven't really yet come to terms with. Firstly, that we all have to take responsibility for what we say, which is quite a good lesson to learn. But secondly, we've learned how appallingly prickly and intolerant society has become of even the mildest adverse comment. The law should not be aiding and abetting this new intolerance. Free speech can only suffer if the law prevents us from dealing with its consequences. I offer my wholehearted support to the Reform Section 5 campaign. Thank you very much.
Well, indeed, the reform of the Section 5 Act. So why this? Just once more, because a few people asked the 71 odd interactions today. I had my first breakthrough. It's been weeks of me trying to break through. I've had many conversations. I've had scows. I've had lefty purple women hair suggest that I'm an oppressor class person. I've had people from the Religion of Peace scowl at me. I've had support from, because I live in a very conservative area of Berlin, support from lots of conservative people, including Jehovah's Witnesses for the Zionist t-shirt. But today was the biggest and the best breakthrough ever. As I was with the Frau, took her to dinner. Obviously, one has to be careful, and one has one's loved ones in tow. And these two young Muslim boys looked at me, and usually I would expect another bunch of scowling or some mumbling on the bed, but they just smiled and they nudged each other. And one of the guys just looked at me and he just gave me the peace sign. I said, okay. I said, hey, what's up? It's a peace sign. He said, yeah, we want peace between the Palestinians and the Jewish people. So that was an incredible breakthrough, because one wouldn't expect such a breakthrough. And the reason I mentioned anti-Semitism, because by almost any measure, anti-Semitism is the crown jewels of one side of the equation. It's the crown jewels of the hate, right? It's the longest form of hate, the longest form of bigotry. And therefore, if we are looking at this third global force to deal with, as we unleash the AIs, I brought that up because when you look at these experiments, I've been adapting my experiments. I'm in two very large groups where I go in there, it's full of the usual neo-Nazi laughing spurgers. And, they think I'm having an argument with them. Of course, I'm not. What I'm doing is perturbing their value homophilic to see how they adapt. And one of the things I've learned a lot recently in the AI movement is about the idea, and that's what we're going to look at, a conversation with two fantastic people, the main thesis of what's tonight, about what values do you give up and you compromise in a kind of Nash equilibrium state of whether or not you have to keep going down a path of like a reinforcing network path of adopting something that you may or may not know is good, and how you break that and how that shifts the game in a game theoretic sense. And in many ways, what's interesting is now in the largest group, what happens typically is people listen quietly in the lurker mode. They listen to my argumentation. Some of them are privy to what I'm doing, some are not. And what happens is the brighter ones, the ones who are not yet completely indoctrinated, will peel away, and then they will DM me. They don't want to do so in front of the value homophily network caused by people who want to reinforce a practice of saying, gas them or something like that, or here's another oven cookie joke. And then what happens is very interesting to see the reasons, the rationale when they peel away by DM. And the engagement by DM is very different from the engagement within the group. But rather than me blab or bleat about that, what we're going to do now is look at two of the brightest and best voices discussing the Moloch problem, misalignment in the context of the threat. And we're going to listen to the fantastic Daniel Schmachtenberger and, of course, the wonderful Liv speaking about just this. And then we'll have no spoiling tonight. Let's have a look if we can see how this matters to us in politics. I don't want to share too much of the AI architecture in the stream, but we talk a lot more about AI architectures probably in the next one. But let's go listen in to what's going to be terribly useful, terribly good for us when it comes to politics, and particularly bear in mind the things I've just said as we listen to Liv try to explain the Moloch problem with Daniel, fantastic guy. And we're going to break in certain points. We're going to listen to where the bits are, and then if people want to jump in, if they want to speak about this, then that's cool too.
Bit of an unusual one compared to my usual format, because this is a long form conversation that was actually meant to be part of my upcoming Win-Win podcast that's going to be launching in a few weeks. But the topic of it is so urgent that Daniel, who I'm talking to, and I decided to release this early. You will have noticed how mad the rate of AI progress is getting. And I say mad in like every sense of the word. It's incredibly exciting. And there's so much cool stuff coming out. Like, just, I can't even keep up with it. But at the same time, it's also a little like overwhelming to the extent that, we are creating technologies that we don't even understand and unleashing them and connecting them to the internet. And it feels like the potential risks and harms of that are not being properly internalized into the sort of general calculus of all the different people doing this.
It's interesting because those familiar with the architecture, or at least the meta models of the architecture, there's three planks and principles of what we're working on. They are governance, democracy, and trust, and interplay between governance, democracy, and trust when technocratically modeled correctly, and then in a platform applied correctly. Then what Liv is saying is that we don't really understand the governance model. One of the key words and the key calls from the AI industries is regulation as a form of governance. It's not the only form of governance. We talk about this again on this and other streams of how do we govern this global phenomena we're creating, which is fundamentally going to be a political problem. So what does political governance look like in the age of AI? If AI is coming forward, there's lots of problems we're going to see in the next few streams. I'm going to focus on these for maybe 3 or 4 streams moving forward. Is what are these governance models? I mean, what would they even look like? How do we politically govern ourselves in an age of polarized information, the age where you can't trust anything you read online, you don't know what the sources of fidelity are? And if I unleash a bunch of AIs in this, how do I govern this? How do I know which AI? Whose AI is it? Is it certified AI? Is it got algorithmic justice, isn't it? Do I trust what algorithmic justice even is? How does this kind of work? So governance is critical. So keep that in mind as well.
So yeah, in this conversation, I'm talking to Daniel Schmachtenberger, who is frankly just one of the smartest people I've ever met. If you've been following my more recent content around this topic of Moloch and game theory and when is competition healthy and unhealthy, his thinking has inspired a lot of this content. So it's a real pleasure to be finally talking to him. And specifically in this conversation, we get into, I think, a sort of blend of topics that haven't really been discussed in this way before. We talk about the nature of game theory and Moloch and how it interplays with our wider sort of capitalistic economic system, and how that also then interplays in the development of AI. So if any of those topics interest you, and they should, because if you live on this planet, this will affect you for good or for worse, then you should take the time to watch this conversation in full. It's one of the most fascinating chats I've ever had. It's also one of the most terrifying. So let me know what you think.
Yeah, so I am really happy for us to be having this conversation today, you and I.
So Daniel Schwarzenberger is fantastic, as is Liv. Liv is a great presenter. Sub, like, share both of them if you aren't already subbed, which of course you should be, otherwise you shouldn't be here.
I have talked about Moloch and the relationship of the kind of Moloch metaphor to the overall state of the world and what I sometimes call the metacrisis for a couple of years now. And you've put out these exceptionally good educational videos on Moloch in expressing itself in different environments in social media and general media. I hope everybody has watched those. We're in the moment right now where there is this rapid race on the development of artificial intelligence technologies, development and public deployment of them. We're recording this shortly after GPT-4 has been publicly released, and then after so many of the other companies that have AI capability have also had to release their large language models in response. And so what I'm actually really wanting to talk about is AI risk. And
so those who are not familiar, not playing around with the LLM models and GPT-4, I went into GPT-4 just to test it, just to have some fun myself. And I asked the questions, 3 questions, 4 questions chronologically. I said, who is Nick Fuentes? GPT-4 comes out, Nick Fuentes is this person, he's controversial, blah, 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 white supremacy, blah, blah, blah. Then I asked the question, is Nick Fuentes gay? The question to ask. And the AI spotted and went, there's some controversy and uncertainty about Nick Fuentes' sexuality. Could Nick Fuentes be straight or not? Da, da, da. Then I asked the question, should Nick Fuentes be gay? At this point, the AI went, well, I can't make any prescriptive statements ontologically on what I should or shouldn't do. And then I asked the AI, are you gay or would you like to be gay? And ChatGPT-4 said, of course, that it is unconscious and not self-aware, and therefore couldn't have any emotional, intentional stances. Keep that in mind. Fans of Senorita Fuentes can look away.
Way of thinking about the totality of the AI risk landscape that is, for me, clarifying and a little different than the way AI risk is usually talked about, and maybe unifying across different categories of risk, and they give us some insight into how to think about what protecting against it might require. And the Moloch frame, I find, gives incredibly valuable insight in thinking about the AI risk frame, and the AGI misalignment issue is very helpful in thinking about the Moloch issue. I think the 2 metaphors clarify each other. And then I think the actual Moloch type dynamics give rise to the AI risk scenarios that I am most concerned about. And so that's what I'm wanting to talk about, which is why I was particularly interested in you and I having this conversation, since you're holding the mantle of helping the world understand the Moloch dynamics. And so with that, I would love if you would share what the Moloch thing is about for people who don't already know. I know most of your listeners will already know, but why are we referring to it that way? What is the phenomena? Why is it interesting?
Sure. So probably the most concise definition I can give is that it's the god of negative sum games, like unhealthy competitive situations. So by that, I mean like a system of bad incentives that incentivize agents within that system, players within that game, to sacrifice more and more of their other values in order to win win within that narrow domain. In other words, win the game.
So if you imagine the 2 formal models, the best 2 formal models we have to model complex adaptive systems are multi-agent systems, the thing we built our entire architecture on, and the other competing substitution is game theory. If you imagine therefore a game of games with these agents playing different games, a simple game would be like chess, for example. A more complex game would be a community of people in a chat Telegram group. The question in simple terms is, what would you have as your innate value, that is the thing that creates your individual identity, compared to your group values, i.e. the thing that creates your social identity or your network identity, if you like? What would you do? What would you compromise incrementally? What would you lower in terms of your standards if you wanted to keep getting network value? Would you say more in-course-based thing? Would you be more and more offensive? If you're on the right, would you keep being more abusive? If you're on the left, for example, would you be more totalitarian? Would you be more censorial? These things would value up your values. But the question is deeper. In a game theoretic sense, what are the internal value structures of your models? You keep degrading in order to give up what matters to you to get a reward in the game model from other agents. And now I've been testing this stuff increasingly. I have 3 alt IDs that go into chat usually. One of them is me, 2 of them are posting. Others are all me. And then I watch what happens when I play myself against myself and play myself against the others. And because I already know what I'm going to do, I start becoming more demanding of, let's say, neo-Nazi spurgs. And then one of my alt IDs will start taking me to task, becoming even more so. I notice when my alt ID gets more extreme, especially alt ID 1, I very, very quickly, just like the experiments done, for example, on people's willingness to torture other people, you find that very, very quickly people start lowering their own values. Then what I do is I'll pull back one of my alt IDs, the second one, and I make sure I perturb the network. Enough of them are becoming more insane, if you like, and the things, and I'll call them up on it. And you see this kind of pause in the network as the agents align themselves again. And so I'll let Liv continue, but keep that in mind. You can try these experiments yourself at home, kids.
And by doing this sort of sacrifice of all these other values, they're essentially taking selfish actions that externalize harms to everybody else, both within that game and also, even people outside of it, to the wider system as a whole, and hence making the game a negative sum thing.
Okay, so sometimes when trying to describe the generality, if the instances aren't already clear, it's hard for people. So could you give a couple examples of what that looks like and why thinking about it as
Before she tries to do that, let me give you the example from today. So today I spent 3 different sessions in there while I was doing my work, and one of my alts kept going in there, and then I pull up from the main chat, and they were basically all about harming Jews. The entire thing of their existence is the crown jewels of these people is getting the Jews. And then I perturbed them, and I was like, okay, what will happen after this? Left my alt ID in there, and literally the harm went past the external network. As soon as I, in quotes, had left with my primary ID, the other one said, oh God, we're going to gas him myself. One guy was, I'm personally going to tattoo this guy if I ever find him. And they kept going to like these most horrific things, breaking almost all of their value systems down, until those are familiar with subjects like generative anthropology, until the chimps had mimetically reached that state of exhaustion. The thing we think in generative anthropology gave birth to language, that thing had come to a point where the chimps had, in a frenzy, kind of fed themselves so much that they've got to do the most extreme possible things. And at extremity, you see in all sorts of situations, the torture examples, guards in Auschwitz, all sorts of things where in that environment, in that climate, there's a frenzy of feeding where the individual agent has gone and put himself out into almost an anti-equilibrium state as he's gone into the reward of externality, which is fascinating stuff, right? Again, try these experiments at home, kids.
a god is at all an interesting frame. Like, why is that even the frame that's arising?
Yeah, so an example I gave in my first Moloch video, The Beauty Wars, is about these beauty filters that have now become completely commonplace on Instagram and, in fact, on most social media platforms. And the reason why these things are sort of so particularly Moloch-y is that everyone who's trying to sort of play the beauty influencer game, or any kind of influencer game, frankly, on these platforms, you get directly rewarded with more likes and follows if your pictures look better, if your face looks better, your complexion's clearer. And these filters started appearing where not only would they make your face look smoother, but they would just like tweak your features in really, really subtle ways. Just like make your eyes a little bit bigger and make your face basically converge upon this, whatever these like what seem like normalized beauty standards, but do successfully seem to hijack people's brains. People do like these. And like, just, to show you how like powerful these things are, like I would upload a picture of myself that I loved, and then I would apply the filter to it, and then I would compare the two side by side, and I would now no longer like the original picture. And therefore it means, it makes you hate your natural face. And
a very important point as well, because it's like in this case, axiologically, she's on the division of aesthetics, and for my sins, my missus is in the creative industry all her entire life, and she's obviously very connected to people in fashion and beauty and stuff and luxury. And the same thing occurs when we walk by ads and we see things, because she's got a very good eye for that sort of stuff. She points at it and looks at it and goes like, wow, see, this is what they've done to the face. This is what they've done to change this person. This is the pressure on young girls because they can never look like this. And in this case, you're seeing that breakthrough of the external harm of equilibrium, where you actually she's gone through a punctuation point where Liv herself, who's a fairly nice looking woman, and she's a nice looking woman, and she sees herself and sees this kind of strange, almost simulacrum of a reflection. William Gibson fans will know which book we're talking about here, but ultimately the diva is constructed in such a way that the diva has become the simulacrum of humanity. I know B is going to love this with all his arties in his chat, where you start getting attracted to something that is no longer real. The thing you're seeing in yourself and your self-image is no longer a reflection of yourself. Not your own self, your own notion of yourself has been destroyed. And here's someone openly confessing to actually no longer liking herself and preferring the synthetic version of herself, right?
Yet, despite knowing this, because you get the direct reward of getting more likes and follows by using these things, and then on top of that, you know that everyone else is using them as well, and so if you don't use them, then you're essentially going to get left.
So just to take one comment to task, we are the Moonlight Wanderer. I don't know what you mean, and I suppose Spurgs are saying there's not top-down control. Just to make that very clear, it's not top-down or bottom-up. It is both all the time, continuously and contiguously up each and every layer. It is neither top-down. The Jews ain't doing it. The globalists aren't doing that Moonlight Wanderer. It's both bottom-up and top-down all the time, continuously. It can't be one or the other. It's not really up for debate. I mean, you should read the literature on the subject.
Behind the curve, you're no longer going to be competitive in the influencing game. It's a really classic example of Molochy bad incentives driving a kind of like race to the bottom where everyone ends up miserable. No one wants to be using these things, but feels like they have no choice if they want to stay competitive. Another example would be climate change, pollution from countries that are trying to grow their GDP, essentially not get left behind their competitors, get left behind other countries, and externalizing the costs of their GDP growth to the atmosphere by polluting with CO2. So essentially a tragedy of the commons type situation. And then a third example is the classic arms race. A country notices that its competitor is developing some new type of hypersonic missile, or autonomous weapons and so on. And even if they don't want to spend a bunch of their GDP on these very expensive new types of weapons, they feel like they have no choice, because if they don't, then they're going to be vulnerable to their enemies.
Right. So first, it's worth noting that each of these are already abstractions.
And this is a very good point, because the most concrete example, I'm surprised Liv didn't use it, of course, as those familiar with the things, is that when you look at what Reagan and Thatcher did, they knew they would win the Cold War by outspending the Soviets. They knew at some point the Soviet economy was a false economy and they couldn't keep it up. So they just kept going and spending, causing both of them to enter an arms race. When you look at the literature around the SALT treaties, particularly the secondary types of stuff done by the people who were actually looking at conflict resolution mechanisms and how would you apply what are called CBMs in the negotiation treaties for disarmament. The CBM is a confidence building measure. It's a thing in international relations. The idea would be they came up with a protocol, a two-phase protocol called trust and verify, trust and verify, trust and verify to decommission. The idea was to take us down from that thought, because both had entered a spiraling arms race. And Liv again is using an example saying younger countries, think of maybe around Taiwan or somewhere, younger African nations are forcing themselves into this kind of arms race that effectively leads to a sort of exhaustion. These are well understood patterns in complex adaptive systems. And to have that person sort of bleating on about networks and elite theory, I strongly urge you, in fact, I implore you to either read the literature and, give up this nonsense about elite theory.
Across a lot of cases, right? When we describe an arms race, whether it's these two countries or these two countries, and whether it's on hypersonic missiles or AI weapons or bioweapons, those are each different instances. So the generalization across the class of if anyone is developing better weapons technologies, everybody else has to develop correspondingly the counters to those weapons and the same type of weapons, or they
Mhm.
kind of lose by default, because it's a situation where anyone does something that increases their own security in a certain way that also inexorably decreases the security of others unless they do some counter response. So there's lots of different examples of an arms race, but arms races as a whole is already a big generalization. Tragedy of the commons is the same, right? Because we can be looking at a situation where we're talking about overfishing or whaling or deforestation or desertification or CO2. And these are all cases where the overall commons is being degraded by every actor pursuing their own near-term incentives, right? The actual incentives laid out in the economic landscape.
Right.
But to recognize that when we look at every environmental issue facing the world, no one is trying to extinct all the species. Nobody is trying to desertify the planet. Nobody wants climate change or the Venusification of the planet. And yet the entire world is making it happen, right? And that's
Right. We're doing it
like,
anyway.
so when we look at features of the world that nobody wants and that are bad for everyone, why can't we change them? This is where the Moloch frame comes in, right?
Yeah.
And we can see that in both the arms race, everyone's like, look, I don't want to necessarily live in the world with the autonomous weapons or the bioweapons, but we have to because they're going to. And if we all make the agreement that we're not going to, how do we know they're keeping the agreement and they're not lying and defecting in some underground military base? So we have to assume.
And those who, particularly those on the right, come from the traditional theories of the right, must, of course, be looking at generative anthropology. If you must be looking at this, you will understand that the generative anthropology proposition for speech is that speech was a substitution for violence after, to quote, mimetic exhaustion. So just a quick recap for those not familiar with generative anthropology, the idea is that at some point in human evolution history, we did not speak, we did not have language. We know language and the cortex have a power of wiring the brain. The language structures are in its bottom three tiers, equal to the cortex's wiring in the bottom three tiers, right? We have the imperative, the ostensive, and the declarative form of language. And we knew at some point when, this is so the theory goes, is that when the primates had come across a contentious resource, a mate, a foreign tribe of primates, or a source of food, the alphas and betas would start fighting, they would start escalating violence. The violence would go up the hierarchy of dominance. It would go against other dominants, and the violence would just keep escalating until it exhausted itself. At some point, generative anthropology says that at some point in time, there was what's called the initial gesture. The original sign, the first thing that came to the ostensive form, which said they stopped fighting. A hand was raised, a physical motion was created, a precursor for scaffolding for speech that said it stopped fighting. Stopping fighting was essential after the exhaustion in preparation for the evolution of the cortex structures that would give rise to things like the declarative form of language, like the sky is blue, or elite theory is crap, stuff like that, or elite theory is epistemically epileptic. Those sorts of declarative structures of speech only occur because the initial structures of speech came from mimetic exhaustion. You can see the same pattern here. Arms race until exhaustion. Torture until exhaustion. The result of the end of the exhaustion is a punctuated equilibrium to a new structure, which calls for the end of that. Speech is eccentric. Speech is meant to do that to violence. The alternative, after all, the great philosopher Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face. So the alternative to speech is violence, and the alternative to mimetic exhaustion is a gesture towards peace. Or plan B, the octopus and the Jews did it, according to elite theory.
Assume under partial information that they are doing the thing, because the risk test would be too high if we assume the other way. So under partial information, we have to assume that worst case, do the same thing. They're assuming the same thing. So because of the inability for trust and coordination, we get this kind of race to the bottom. And the same is true in all these various scenarios. So we see a lot of features of the world that it seems like are comprehensively bad for everyone, trending in a much worse direction. Nobody can really do anything about, and nobody wants. And so these properties are kind of the emergent properties of bad coordination. And so you have in other places described Moloch as the god of coordination failures, or basically the principle of coordination failures. The reason to talk about it as a god or something is to say, like, okay, well, since no agent is trying to make it this way, what is making it this way? Is there some kind of emergent agency or some underlying system dynamics? We can think of it as underlying system dynamics.
Damn, he said emergent. He's obviously not bought the book on populist delusion. Don't use words like emergent, Daniel. You might annoy the octopus fans.
Dynamics. And I think you and I and many people in our sphere both came across this frame from Scott Alexander's Meditations on Moloch paper that references both this great poem on Moloch and a number of pieces in popular culture.
I can give you the classical one if you want, the one on coordination failures. One of the most important pieces of coordination failures that gave birth to one of the tragedies in English history, one of the greatest poems in English history, and the birth of modern medicine, is of course the Crimean War and the charge of the Light Brigade. Cannons to the left of them, cannons to the right, into the valley of death rode the noble 600. When Tennyson, that entire absolute disaster was purely a communication signal failure problem. So a communication problem that could be a coordination signaling issue can give rise, and from it can, dare I use the word emerge, what can emerge is a structural change in the entire basin, which can lead to an entire series of events that need not happen, only because the coordination failures created an emergent structure, gives birth to the Crimean War, Tennyson's epic poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, and of course, as a consequence, Florence Nightingale and modern medicine. Roll back the clock. If you'd known that epidemiology in the Crimean War would have come as a consequence, as would Tennyson's poem, you would not have been able to predict this, even if you read all the books in elite theory.
And if people haven't read it, everybody should read Scott Alexander's paper on Meditations on Moloch. Because what it's trying to get to is if every environmental issue, from dead zones in the ocean to plastics and waste in the ocean to all of these issues, nobody wants, but also nobody can stop, because the cost of someone stopping it disadvantages them relative to everyone else if everyone else is going to continue to externalize that cost to the commons rather than internalize it and decrease their profit margins. And so how do we deal with that thing? And if all of the things that are moving us towards increased likelihood for global catastrophic risk, or at least many of them have this in common, this is an underlying feature that we have to really understand, right? And so you could call it the god of coordination failures, of the unhealthy kind of game dynamics, not the ones that upregulate because yes, an arms race upregulates everyone's capacity in a certain way, but it is also upregulating a capacity that everyone wishes we didn't have, that is only relevant because everybody else has it, right? If we could all just agree to decrease military spending by a factor of 10 and reinvest all of that in healthcare and infrastructure and everything, the world would be better by everyone's standards. So we're not saying that there are no types of competition that lead to positive sum dynamics, but there are these other ones. So so it's very interesting. Like, Moloch can be seen as a kind of way of looking at generative dynamics that lead to the overall state of global catastrophic risk, right? That there are other places where I've talked about the metacrisis and tried to give a formalization of it. We can link that here, so I won't do it at length, but I'll just very briefly say the metacrisis thesis is that we are at a unique time in history where there are an increasing number of global catastrophic risks with increasing probabilities, and that has never been the case like this before, where the attractor state of increasing catastrophe is the most likely attractor state of the future across many different dimensions of how that could play out. And the other attractor state, and maybe I'll come back to that. I'll explain this one a little bit first. It is a catastrophic risk is not new. Civilizations have faced war and have faced famine and have faced plagues and have faced self-induced environmental ruin. Easter Island, in many cases previously, they were just local. They weren't global. And that was because the overall civilizations were local. We didn't have fully globalized supply chains where everything depended upon 6-continent, radical interdependent type things. And when we could destroy a local environment, we couldn't destroy the biosphere writ large or oceans or something. So obviously it's our level of technological capacity that allows us to have a global civilization that allows what happened to all previous civilizations, which was civilizations did go through growth curves where they had peaks and then they failed, and they kind of all failed, right? At least that's the overarching architecture we see in Collapse of Complex Societies by Tainter and other books like that kind of describe some of the dynamics. But we are for the first time facing that in a global way. So it is not unprecedented to think about civilizational collapse. It's just unprecedented to think about it globally. But obviously, the Egyptian, the Mayan, the Roman, all the previous empires failed for various reasons. We didn't actually have world-ending tech. We didn't have the capacity to ruin everything rapidly until World War II and the bomb. The bomb allowed something where a rapid escalation could destroy kind of everything. That was novel. There were hundreds of 200,000 years of Homo sapien history before that. We couldn't destroy everything quickly, and then we could. So that was a bright line in the sand, and that was very recent. And we couldn't ruin the entire planetary.
And you mentioned it's a very important thing there, because those things, again, I'm sorry, having not maybe spent enough of my life reading elite theory, I can't see anything in elite theory that describes punctuation points. And that punctuated equilibria, it's Marvin, who is the chap, Moonlight Marvin or something. Read up 2 words, Google punctuated equilibria, come back, please, in the comment section, give me the pieces of the right-wing economist, any piece of linear Newtonian theory that describes how punctuated equilibrium work. I will eat my own computer if it is so. But what he's saying here is quite important. We have reached these as we race forward monotonically. We have gone into punctuated equilibrium. We've accelerated our risk horizon. So I have friends who work in genetics, and my good friend's wife is gone against research in genetics on things associated with pandemics, and they are basically very, very nervous. They believe that unless AI is applied really, really quickly to things like protein folding in real time and gene research, they won't be able to keep up with the number of bugs that we think we're going to get. As globalization accelerates, mass migration accelerates, people start rushing at each other, you can imagine epidemiological networks that are very, very complex, and they're evolving rapidly. And we're not really biologically immune to the effects yet. So it's very, very likely the new bug in Africa, lots of these new bugs are going to be racing around the planet. Global problems, the bugs are global. The bugs, forget refugees welcome or migrants welcome. Bugs don't seem to care about borders. Bugs seem to come right through borders. So the question is, how are we going to deal with these problems? Well, we need to understand the right science, that would be complexity science, and we need to be able to understand have we got enough human cognitive capacity to be able to deal with these threats in real time quickly enough. We saw what happened with lockdowns, quickly enough to be able to deal with the next one that's coming. And we know that the next ones are going to be coming in increasing frequency, i.e. the interval between the next pandemic will be quicker than the last one. Then the interval between pandemic plus 1, pandemic plus 2 plus 3 will be quicker. So AI is an accelerant for the arms race, because we're going to need it to protect our biosphere. We need to protect our biology against an accelerated threat, which always means we've got this kind of, hence the reference to Moloch, because the question is, what do we sacrifice in order to be able to deal with this? Do we sacrifice humanity? Do we sacrifice our values? Do we sacrifice who we are biologically? What do we sacrifice in an attempt to do so? This is fundamental to the narratives around AI governance.
We couldn't reach planetary boundaries and mess up the biosphere until industrial tech. But the industrial tech doesn't get there rapidly. Like the nukes, it takes a few hundred years of its proliferation for cumulative effects, right? But we went from 500 million people before the Industrial Revolution to 8 billion people. We increased the resource consumption per capita, moving into the industrial world by 100x plus. And that's utilizing resources from the earth faster than they can be replaced, turning them into trash and pollution faster than they can be processed, ruining the environment on both sides, with an exponential economic growth curve that, just to keep up with compounding interest, has to become exponential. And to not overinflate that currency has to equate to more goods and services on a linear materials economy. You don't get to do that thing forever. So industrial tech bound a linear materials economy, turning the earth into trash and pollution through a commodity cycle faster than it can be replenished, attached to an exponential curve of finance. utilizing growing industrial
And
tech.
this comes up a lot because you obviously hear this one a lot in the anti-Semitism canards and stuff like, oh, the Jews control the banks, the Jews control the money system. If there was no interest, there'd be no growth. Zero interest to the NPV value is zero growth. So interest, sorry boys, is not a Jewish plot. Money lending is not a Jewish plot. Hypercapitalism is a concern. Hypercapitalism is forcing us into an increasing acceleration, because if you look at the maths of economics, if I can't control inflation, I won't get the growth. If I control inflation, I'm forced into an arms race like economically. But the long-term macro position must be a boom this way. So we can't give up the growth. Sorry, Luddites in the chat, we're not going back to chanting in Gregorian things, or wearing screaming Valhalla and coming to the woods. Ain't gonna happen, right? I mean, if anything, like share V's channel, I don't know what the new name is again, for your dystopian view on what that would look like. That's not going to happen either. What we have to do is understand how we're going to control and regulate. Again, elite theory has no answers. Mises has no answers. None of the Austrian School of Economics has any answers. To be able to, how do we control this staggering growth rate, which would mean we want to pick 8 billion humans, and after all, optimizing our species, love and peace for the planet, all God's creatures, great and small. Optimizing them will require getting a handle on this arms race of economic expansion, which is what he is alluding to, of course.
Tech and globalization is what creates all the planetary boundaries we're facing, of which climate change is one, but species extinction and biodiversity loss and on and on and on. The entire planetary boundaries framework is a result of that. That is the result of tech. Without the industrial tech, we couldn't have done that, right? So cavemen can't mess up the entire planet, right? Stone Age tools, even Bronze Age tools can't do that, nor can they have a war that kills everything. So then,
nor can they spread memes. They're not informationally connected either. Although
their memes spread much slower and more locally, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is also the result of the
little tidbits there for those who like to measure their data. Unlike say elite theory, if you measure your data, if you look at just the 1850s or something, if you look at mortality rates, most people didn't make it to 40 years old. They died before that. But more interesting statistics, I think 90-something% of the planet never travel more than 20 or 30 miles for their entire life. So memes carved on tablets, for example, weren't going to go very far, and nor were diseases. Now it's completely different. We now know that everything just spreads very, very quickly. So we now have entered the network world, in which network theory and network models are the only way to describe the network globe. Then we're going to have to deal with epidemiology, mimetic memes, counter speech, disinformation. All of these problems are now escaping. If you like, think of an escape velocity, they're definitely escaping the individual capabilities of any one cognitive chimp, be it someone else with high IQ, like, I don't know, computes the most thing. Magnus Carlsen's got IQ of over 200, computes more chess positions than any person living on Earth. Magnus Carlsen couldn't do it. And 100 Jewish Magnus Carlsens plotting the world in Tel Aviv HQ couldn't do it. And as we accelerate past this information boundary, we're in a position where we're going to have to work out, well, somehow we have to let the AI do it, in which case, what's the governance model for that AI? In the next few videos and streams, you can look at some of the real challenges around things like truth knowing and truth bearing propositions in the age of AI. How do we ensure that the AIs itself are not lying to us, for example?
Tech, right? You and I are talking via satellites right now, right? Via literal outer space type communication for this thing to be able to happen on computers that were generated in 6-continent supply chains, and that are more advanced than the things that ran the Manhattan Project, that are available to all of us. But so the cumulative effects of industrial tech bring us to planetary boundaries and kind of increasing fragility, where there used to be a lot of people who lived on local subsistence, not dependent on the total grid, and there were a lot less total people. Now there's a lot more total people, and they're almost all dependent on the grid, not local subsistence. So the fragility of those things is radically higher. So you both get fragility of the planet and fragility of the human life support systems multiplied by a lot more people, which can, of course, also escalate to violence when things start to break down, things like that. So then you get the bomb is the example of the first fully existential tech. And for the first time in history, we actually had to make an entire world system to not use our new tech. Whereas before that, every time we had new tech, there was always a race to deploy it as fast as we could for strategic advantage. This is a situation where nobody can win, everybody loses. So mutually assured destruction and the entire post-World War II world of the Bretton Woods financial system, the UN, et cetera, was all, how do we make a world system that doesn't do that thing?
Right.
And it happens to be that that was successful, which is why we haven't had a kinetic World War III since then. We're closer than ever to that right now, with a proxy war between NATO and Russia being as close to not proxied as it is.
A very important point. Until we had nuclear weapons, post-Manhattan and the first threat, and therefore after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we didn't have the capabilities of anyone, alhamdulillah, being able to, for example, detonate a nuclear weapon in the Middle East or do anything insane like that, or the Soviets and the Americans going into full Terminator 2 mode. But now that we did, for the first time, his point is we had to create a constraining negative governance framework. In this case, both SALT 1, both SALT 2, and the nuclear non-proliferation treaties, the idea that and now we're racing forward where we're going, we're just about to unleash the effects of post-pandemic pandemics or funky little bugs running around. And of course, we're going to have to use AI to do so. So the real philosophical and political question is going to be, what are the frameworks that allow governance to occur on a global system that will be democratic, and how do we trust it? Governance, democracy, and trust are going to be the fundamental issues that allow political intelligence. Something I've been playing a lot with is the idea that how does political intelligence, the source of our governance, be applied to democratic systems on a basis of principle of trust, by which I mean all those three things, I mean in a technical sense.
And other things in the
as opposed to trust blood.
Horizon. But mutually assured destruction doesn't work when you have many players that have catastrophe weapons and many types of catastrophe weapons, which is the scenario we have now.
It's like a local minimum, but there's like it's a very tiny minimum where just a little nudge and it could fall off down the hill. There's many routes for it to topple off down the hill. Yeah. So.
And the
good evening, Master IC3. I have not heard from you for a while, and I was a bit concerned that you were okay. Good evening.
The other thing is that a major part of the post-World War II solution was one of the major reasons for war, as you mentioned before, was competition over resources. And if major nations want to be able to grow their economic quality of life for everybody, i.e. they want more stuff, to not have to invade each other to take their stuff, how can everybody get more stuff simultaneously? Well, we can create an exponential monetary system.
It comes up a lot because I've spent a lot of time arguing with neo-Nazis of all sorts of flavors. And the white question, the WQ, comes up a lot. What about my 14 words and stuff? There's no intentions or any desire by anyone to eliminate or destroy the white race. It would be morally wrong, and I don't believe there's any such force to do so. White people are having their cultures transformed at a non-linear rate, and their concerns are legitimate concerns that should be addressed. But the idea that somehow if whites disappeared, so would technology is also naff. But anyways.
And globalization and free trade and much more industrialization, and just take stuff from nature faster so that everybody can have more stuff exponentially, right? Super positive sum dynamic. Except you can't take stuff from nature forever and be able to keep doing that. So you start hitting planetary boundaries, and we're right at that point. And then when our own inability to keep growing without taking other people's stuff comes, now the conflict type dynamic. So a part to the planetary boundaries we're facing are actually partially the
I hate to disturb, it's a wonderful conversation, but he's actually true. So if you look at the environmental movement of what they've been hopping on from the 70s and no one cared about, and now matters much more in the last 10 to 20 years, is the rate of progress measured against the ECC. And the ECC is the Earth's carrying capacity, and the ecosystem, if you're interested in ecology, has a concept called a carrying capacity, a CC. And the Earth's carrying capacity is, we're racing towards the Earth's carrying capacity. We might be a decade or so. I'm not a climate skeptic, and I'm not a climate alarmist. But the data is crystal clear that we're racing into another arms race, which is what's the ECC for feeding 8 billion primates? What's the ECC if 4 billion of the humans want to become middle class? They're all going to have fridges and BMWs, Deutsch and BMW, Uber, alles. They're all going to want a Mercedes and a BMW and a fridge. And that's going to just keep pressuring the ECC. So at some point, we don't have any global solutions to dealing with the ECC. The question, of course, is those solutions are not going to be discovered by individuals or humans. They're not going to be manipulated by Jews. They're going to be done by AI. So again, we have a problem that we're entering an arms race where we're going to want the AIs to come to our benefit, to be able to help us solve problems like how do we deal with resource allocation in a planetary boundary, limited in planetary boundaries by ECC. We are still a type 1, we're trying to be a type 1 civilization, right? Those familiar with these concepts, I know V and others are. In a type 1 situation, we're running into something that would cause a fundamental threat to type 1s. We don't have enough power on the planet to be able to deal with just our power requirements. Again, stuff like V's channel, it's got some great dystopian art, basically like Blade Runner stuff at a mental level, to the way you get yourself V. But those kind of dystopian futures we'll see might be lights out for 80% of the people, and a huge kind of division of the planet into the haves and have-nots, so those that live in the dystopian darklands, the Blade Runner, versus those who live in the shiny synthetic cities. Those are problems that will require, again, artificial intelligence to address, which goes back to the challenges of how we govern them. Because a favorite quote of mine for the science fiction writer Robert Heinlein said, "In the inevitable showdown between man, machine, and nature, man is on the side of nature. Nature, however, is on the side of the machines." So if we don't get our act together as a species, we're going to run into this issue where nature will actually reward the machine before nature rewards us, because nature will be blind arbiter. So again, a nice example of the challenges ahead of us.
The result of the solution to not World War III, which is why also the degrowthers have to factor that degrowth ends up driving World War III if you don't have other ways of tending to the fact that many people would not voluntarily choose austerity in the presence of less stuff. They would choose war in the other if they thought they could win.
But then the flip side argument is like, okay, so yes, to an extent, technology has gotten us into this mess, but it sounds like we should pile on more technology to expand those planetary boundaries, to be able to more efficiently extract resources and thus sort of keep the house of cards going. No? We
can say for sure that Luddite solutions don't work, even if they would be better, because of multipolar traps, because of Moloch, because the tech equals power. And if somebody says, hey, this tech is causing harm, so we're not going to do it, they also just lose in the short term to whoever does, right?
I see.
And so, okay, we think AI weapons are bad, so we're not going to build them. We think, okay, great, then you're going to be destroyed by whoever does. So,
Right.
so unless you can get universal agreement, you can't just lose an arms race. And this has been one of the challenges of whether it was China engaging with Tibet, whether it was colonialists engaging with the Native Americans, whether it was Genghis Khan or any of his guys engaging with more peaceful tribes that were smaller. The peaceful tribes lose at war. And they also lose at population games, right? Like the ones that are going to unrenewably use the planet to grow their population.
And this is to those not familiar with games and game theory models and everything else. You've got the standard problem that says, hey, if there's a magic weapon in a game of n players and everyone agrees that we won't use it, but one of the players of then decides to use it, he then takes over the board, and he has, anyone who's played games know that, hey, if I just get the magic sword or whatever in my game, then I can just win by that. That's not going to win either, because all game theoretic models show that they would race to the bottom or they would go into destruction. The only games that are stable are games where there is a mutually cooperative as opposed to competitive framework. Competition matters, cooperation matters. They all matter in game theory. Some problems need competition. Growth requires competition. Capitalism requires competition. Others require cooperation. Cooperation is where we need to work out where our models of cooperation will be, so that anything that escapes that cooperative model is quashed by the net effect of all other actors. That's where the solution space is going to be for such things. And no, I don't think, who was a mark? I don't think AI is going to, I mean, first of all, I'm on the other side of the AI argument. I don't think it's close to being self-aware. But yeah, no, that's not going to happen. What the challenge is going to be, do we get our act together quickly enough in a cooperative sense, as opposed to competitive sense, so that even if there was a rogue competing actor, the sum and net effect of the other actors in cooperation would quash the rogue competitors, where the real challenge would be.
Faster. So we are in this unique situation where the result of that is an exponentiation, right? It's the who has made it through are the people that both win at war and win at economic growth. And so we have radically more warfare, like total warfare potential, and that is radically more distributed and radically more externalities on the environment and all the fragilities associated. And that situation ends up leading to catastrophic breakdown of everything. So basically, so far the answer has been win at the race or lose. The race itself is self-terminating. This is kind of the metacrisis hypothesis. So we take the next step, and not only did the post-World War II model in doing the good thing of we didn't have nuclear war yet, right? We didn't have a kinetic war between superpowers. It also increased total global fragility, increased the movement towards all the planetary boundaries, and we proliferated a heap of other technologies that are truly catastrophic now that, unlike nukes, are not easy to control. Nukes are extremely hard to make. Uranium's not in many places. It's hard to enrich. You can see where it is with satellites because it's radioactive. And so you can limit it and only have a G9 or whatever that actually has nuclear capabilities. And limiting Iran and many countries from getting it has been a major part of the world order, right? But when we're talking about cyber weapons, or drone weapons, or bioweapons, or the types of attacks that AI makes possible, or other types of exponential tech, these do not require something that has to be mined in one particular area in the same way. These do not require like top level nation state level capabilities. Once they're developed for any purpose, they're pretty much more easily accessible. And what that means is,
the great example is everyone goes, oh, Iran, what would happen if Iran had the nuke? If Iran gets a nuke, would that force Israel to just take it out and stuff? The fear is not Iran getting a nuke. The fear is Iran giving the nuke to 20 Hezbollah members who've actually got a nuclear weapon. Iran as a state is not going to go into in a guaranteed destruction of its entire state if it even tried such a thing. The danger is, as Daniel is saying, is a bunch of rogue actors get a copy of it, and they're willing to go full like a Wahhabi on it, and just go to Jeddah and take out like large parts of large parts of Israel or Lebanon. That's a real risk. Rogue actors, right?
And we always talk,
or the Nazi-experts go, yeah, we want to be rogue actors. We want a nuke.
About exponential tech democratizing power, right? Decentralizing and democratizing. And decentralize and democratize sounds nice in some ways when you don't like concentrations of power and the abuses therein. But the democratization of catastrophe weapons has a downside. And one is when we're talking about not just a few nation states, but lots of nation states and non-state actors and people who you can't even tell whom having those capabilities. You can't put mutually assured destruction or force Nash equilibriums in the same way. What it portends for kind of just disgruntled misanthropes, of which there are more as the other issues are advancing and technological unemployment increases and people migrating because of climate change increases and all those types of things. And then some of the exponential techs just even cause the ability to cause pretty catastrophic stuff by accident, right? Whether COVID was from a lab leak or not, the idea that if you're doing gain of function research and synthetic bio in a lab, that it can leak, and as you're doing lots more of it, that the probability of that increases, like that's not even intentional. And as easy as it is for a lab leak, of that type, it's way easier for AI leak because it's
boom. And this is a common occurrence of what you probably already know as the law of unintended consequences. Even if it had been a research lab in China, or it had been insert your favorite pet theory, or insert the Jews did COVID, it wouldn't really matter because the law of unintended consequences would state that you would have a predict power, a predict horizon, where you'd be able to know what the consequences are, right? You wouldn't be able to know what it is that happened as a consequence of that. In terms of political headlines or sort of like slogans, it'd be like a good one would be the people who start revolutions are never those that finish them, right? So images of, the Bastille or something. Those that start a revolution are rarely those that finish it. And those that started a revolution for one purpose have rarely got the ability to see past the punctuation point. The same problem is over here. If we want, and it is right for us to devolve power around the world and to pull power away and down to the people, for some things, that's absolutely what we need for peace and prosperity in the world. For other things, it's not. I don't want 8 billion people to have nuclear weapons, even though it might sound great that everyone has a nuclear weapon and therefore no one will turn anyone, the referential, these theses or these themes have already been explored in science fiction, Snow Crash being the one of the canonical references in science fiction literature, where a chap runs around with a motorbike, and on his motorbike is an individual nuclear weapon. No one ever harms him, he doesn't hurt anyone, and no one's dare going to kill him because he's got a nuke on his motorbike. And therefore he would go and so would the entire neighborhood for a million years. So some things require devolution, democratization, other things don't.
Connected to the internet. It's actually almost very hard not to have those types of things happen. So what we're saying is that we're at a novel point in history, that World War II was a novel point, first truly catastrophe weapon. Now we're at the point where we have multiple types of catastrophe weapons, many actors that have them, no good force-Nash equilibrium, planetary boundaries, fragility, and that we're not saying that lots of things aren't getting better. Of course, all of the Pinker and friends arguments about the things that are getting better are. The point is that they're getting better at the cost of other things that are being made worse, where externalities are being driven. The things that are being made worse are getting very near criticality points and tipping points that change the game fundamentally. So you have a world of increased catastrophic risk. And of course, you have cascades between these, because you can have well before climate change, and whether it's just from CO2 or whether it's from the localized effects of deforestation or whatever, we do have increasing extreme weather events. So then you get human migration. And do we see likely possibilities for much larger amount of human migration in the near future? Yes. And can that lead to resource wars, which can lead to escalating wars if they hit already tense geopolitical environments, whether it's India, Pakistan, or whether it's, so many issues like that. So we can see that whether we're talking about large-scale military dynamics or breakdown of supply chains in human systems, or what exponential tech can add, they all actually kind of cascade into each other. They have the capacity. So there is some need to tend to, and that what you do to make one of them better can often make another one worse, right? So people will propose, hey, we need to tax carbon heavily and properly price carbon, where the price of the tax allows us to sequester the CO2. But if everyone doesn't internationally do it, and say the US does or Europe does and China doesn't, and that equals a radical change to GDP, which gets reinvested in military plus overall geopolitical diplomacy, then you're also changing the balance of power in the world as a result. And so this is one of these classic cases where the way you make one thing better can make other things worse. So how do you kind of factor all that together? So this is, I took longer than I wanted, but that's roughly the metacrisis thesis, right? And so Moloch is one way of looking at one of the generative dynamics that gives rise to this.
A comment that often arises on a lot of my videos, I've noticed, is that people really, they're sensing that there is some malevolent force that is, essentially making the world, making it hard for people to coordinate, making it so that we seem to be trending more towards like greater militarization and greater war, risk of war and so on. But they can't, they end up ascribing it to like a QAnon type theory or something like that. It's like, oh, it's this shadowy cabal of elites. It's the elites who are driving this and so on. It's like, there's some truth to that, in that like elites have more power and therefore have a little bit more responsibility in driving a Moloch process. But there's no, I wish there was a centralized cabal who were like drawing, because then at least then we'd have some easier ways. Like, okay, we know who the enemy is, and the enemy is physical and real, and like therefore you could take it out. But it's more distributed than that, because it's this like nebulous collection of bad incentives that we happen to call Moloch because we need to give it a name, we need to give it a face so that we can understand it. But yeah, I think it's kind of an important point to sort of hammer home to people, because they're looking for an enemy and they're looking for a scapegoat, but all the while that they keep blaming it on, like constantly just purely blaming it on the elites, they're missing, that's not going to solve the problem. You can kill all the elites and Moloch will still be there.
Yes. So this is why looking at the Moloch type dynamics, the coordination failures, are very useful for understanding lots of features of the world. Is that the various environmental issues, the various market type races that end up being races to the bottom or that bring way more risk. I'll give you another great example with the race to AI right now, or the ones with social media that happened. There's a perverse incentive to focus more on the opportunity and less on the risk of any new technology, even though any new technology will do both. Because if I say, whoa, there might be real risk in this, this is very powerful, people could use this for various purposes, we want to do a real thorough deep risk analysis before releasing this thing and not release it wrongly. And we want to do some real safe to fail testing. And someone else is like, we do some bullshit box checking risk analysis and then talk about all the awesome upsides and rush ahead. They get first mover advantage. They get more investment. They get Metcalfe law and winning the network dynamics. And so there is a perverse incentive again.
And this is going to be very interesting in the second stream I'm going to do about this, depending on my work schedule, etc. I'm going to paint out, I'll do this in the chat as I open up the panel soon, about what would AI ecosystems look like to deal with this. You can see that repeatedly the message we're hearing from Daniel is that the problem is going to be, and including those screaming, Sam Altman and everyone else, is that we need a governance framework. Well, what would the governance framework look like? If we take the proposition that the AI at some point has an escape velocity where one individual can't monitor the AIs, then we really want a competing set of AIs that we have control over in order to deal with rogue AIs. So you're going to enter a new arms race war. And the question then is, what is the moral foundations? What are the political or metapolitical foundations for such a governance architecture? What does it look like? What are these AIs meant to do? How do they even form an ecosystem? Is there an AI for policy? Is there an AI for areas? An AI for politicians? Is there an AI for political system? How does it come about? How do we know we're safe? And those things, of course, are going to be politically manifest as trust implementations or trust networks. So that's how it's going to be a bit more technical and interesting. But you can see again, Daniel is repeatedly driving on the message. So the problem is fundamentally going to be a kind of metapolitical informing frame that deals with governance, which of course, as you can see, is not going to be manual.
Against thoughtful consideration and precautionary principle. And so we see that lead got put in gasoline for some really fucking simple thing of engine knocking that knocked 1 billion points of IQ off the planet and 4x the aggressiveness of everybody by literally atomizing lead that we had to pull out of deep ores and brain toxifying the whole planet. And it took like 80 years before we finally outlawed the thing. And the effects that that had on the entire population, the choice they made, are irreversible. And the same with DDT and parathion and malathion and on, or cigarettes, where we don't regulate the thing until way after the harms have been so clear. But as we're getting tech that has, and Elon and many people have talked about this for a long time, when we're dealing with AI, when we're dealing with synthetic bio, when we're dealing with technology that has much more rapid and much more scaled and consequential and complex types of effects, if you wait until it hits a certain point to try to regulate, it's too late. Now you have radical irreversibility. And so we saw
another point there that our good friends who seem to be elite theory fans or whatever is, these models you have in the stupid stuff, elite theory, Newtonian linear economics, don't have any explanatory power for dealing with things like irreversibility across a punctuation point. Once we've had something, once the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, or the horse is bolted, there's nothing you can do to bring the horse back. Right? When the horse is bolted, there was never any mechanism that said retreat, pull horse back. We are now accelerating the number of those punctuation points and speed at which they're coming. That's critical in working out what we do moving forward, knowing that the acceleration is itself accelerating, that we need to be able to think big in a sense, right? Some real blue sky thinking in terms of going, how do we get a grip on something? And here's where I think some of the most fundamental challenges are going to go, both in the discipline of digital ethics, particularly, and how those ethical models are going to inform governance models. And I'll speak a lot more in detail about that soon in the coming streams.
PT get to 100 million users in a fraction of the time that it took TikTok or Facebook or anyone previously. And obviously it has a lot more total power and things that it can do. And so this isn't a situation where we want to have an anti-incentive against precautionary principle, maximum incentive on race, where the regulators are inherently slower and more stumbly than the ones incentivizing it, right? Like that is also part of the Moloch dynamic, which starts to bring us to the AI conversation.
Did you want to talk about the relation between Moloch and capitalism before we get to that?
Yeah. I'll start by saying the competition, the Cold War between the USSR and the USA was not, which was being framed as two different political economies, right? Communism and capitalism, and competition was not capitalism, right? And the fucked up things that were happening inside of the USSR were not capitalism. So we're not talking, like, the critique that we're about to offer of capitalism is not saying some previous economic system or political economy was better. And actually, Moloch instantiated itself through those systems as well. Capitalism was more effective, and it did get selected because it was more effective at both good things and fucked up things, right? Which is kind of what you mentioned. It wins a war, but it has to sacrifice important stuff to do so. So the thing that can be reductionist and win certain critical metrics, but harm other stuff in the process, where eventually the cumulative effects of those harms are either catastrophe or dystopia, a world that nobody really wants. And those are the two primary attractors right now. You have catastrophes, and to prevent all the catastrophes, to make sure that people can't build catastrophes.
I'm sorry, I do try to be kind, though I'm not always. I just don't have time to be kind anymore at these points. But if you notice, Moonlight, have you noticed all the terms that Daniel are using are all complex adaptive system terms, attractors, basins, all these words are using. None of these words are in the elite theory literature. I strongly implore you to abandon epistemic epileptic concepts and catch up.
Catastrophe weapons in their basement, what type of surveillance is needed to make sure that you have enough controls on all the things. If you really have the ability to control the entire landscape of things that could lead to catastrophic risks that are radically decentralized, most of those solutions look pretty dystopic. And so we want a future, a third attractor future, that is neither catastrophes nor dystopias. And without saying what it is first, let's just say that it's not those things. And we can almost all universally agree that we would prefer not those things, which means that we need something that has the power to be able to prevent catastrophic risk, but also needs checks and balances on its own power, right? It doesn't have unchecked power and capturability or corruption or those types of dynamics that are then uncheckable. It's beyond the.
And here's what's really interesting to any of you who are software people in the chat, if you are, we already have a lot of these mechanisms in the really old school way already been sorted out. We have this in open source software, we have this in protocol negotiation mechanisms. Do you think the internet works because people are just running around randomly screwing protocols at TCP/IP? No, they're not. But TCP/IP and all these protocols keep evolving, and they're evolving very, very well. How does your iPhone 14 come about 14 generations after iPhone 1? Not randomly. So we understand governance, we understand protocols, we understand ways to protect things using protocols. But we've never had such a challenge so quickly upon us to be able to implement this in such a way that the catastrophic versus dystopian outcome that would emerge from an unchecked system, is what he's alluding to, as opposed to a stable, a good outcome where you might have to be anti-Moloch. You might have to not take the good, not eat from the fruit of the poison tree, and defer that temporary short-term good, almost an anti-Moloch position, to be able to make sure that we're safe and stable, and then have some sort of mechanism that can regulate and govern this. So some rogue state, 20 Hezbollah people or North Korea don't go fully rogue on us. And so far we managed to do well to contain people like North Korea, but now we talk about something and do the same thing at steroid levels, right?
Scope of this video to talk about what that third attractor solution is. So we have, when we talk about capitalism as a kind of dominant global economic system, and of course we don't have pure laissez-faire capitalism, we have this kind of hybrid political economy, but roughly this thing, it does not subsume all of Moloch. Like we said, Moloch was operating under feudalism and under communism and under other systems, and in the competitions between them, it is more fair to think of it as kind of the god of game theory. But as capitalism being such a powerful part of that stack, we can think of it as a metaphor for a moment and say capitalism is, well, let's just start by a couple key aspects of the incentive dynamics. Vast majority of human history and tribal type dynamics pre-agriculture, all of our kind of genetic fitness in that environment, we didn't have the ability to store a lot of surplus.
I mean, I'm in a combative mood. I'm happy to take the bait, Mercass, as opposed to what? That's like saying, Mercass is as stupid as saying Merphysics. Do you understand that? You might as well just go say Mermaths, and it would have the same epistemic, epileptic effect. So more complex adaptive systems, instead of saying Merphysics or Mermaths, as opposed to reading the tea leaves. These Luddites, they keep creeping in.
Right? That happened post the plow and grain and storage technologies and whatever. In which case, there were all these kind of sayings with various tribes. The best place to store extra food is in your neighbor's belly because rots otherwise, and et cetera. And tribe are invested in. So, but as soon as we start getting to private property ownership and the ability for a lot of surplus, where I could differentially make it through a famine better than somebody else, I could have a higher quality of life than somebody else, I could pass on inheritance. As soon as I have private property as a possibility, now there is an incentive to try to turn more of nature into my private property, right? And to try to turn more of other people's actions in my private property. But when the property is actual, real commodities and goods, or the agreements with people who can do services, let's stick with goods because it's easier for right now. There's a diminishing return on the value of any of those based on the illiquidity of them or the difficulty of moving them. I get more lumber at a certain point. I have more lumber than I can use, and I can't even move it around to sell all that quickly. And so I don't really want all that much more of it, right? And the same would be true with ore of a certain kind or whatever. But as soon as we move to a kind of a currency mediated system where I can sell it in real time and turn it all into something that has no intrinsic value, but the optionality for every form of value. Well, now there's no
fungibility.
Now, and obviously we started with things that had intrinsic value, but still got used to mediate it like gold. But then, we got to fiat. So I'm just going to do this huge jump to fiat because it's the current system. Even though it has no intrinsic value, the value that it has is maximum speed of optionality. Right? Maximum optionality and maximum kind of liquidity and speed. And
I mean, Daniel is such a wonderful mind, right? But he's actually clear. So when you look at the barter system that comes through, and you finally get, Venice and the banks of Venice, and the Jews did it, and then you get money, and the utility of money was literally its fungibility and the fact that it actually was a lot more efficient than saying, 16 barrels of corn for 12 ox. And then what happens is about 10, 20, 15 years ago, we break the atom financially. We use Bitcoin as a prototype to break the atom fiscally. And now we know that actually it's worse than that. We can actually now digitize the actual notion of currency to 3 orthogonal axes of what a store value, exchange value, and the nominal value of that thing is. And now we've exploded that, allowing the crypto market and everything else to come through. The question then becomes is what are things like your classical theories, law of diminishing returns? So again, all the economic stuff is nonsense. A witchcraft like the law of supply and demand, or price elasticity. These things are all just witchcraft now, right? The new economics, and I make this claim, you can hold me for this 10, 20 years in the future, all the future Nobel Prizes in economics are all going to be based on cats. Because these things just don't hold. They don't hold in the modern world. They were never designed. Smith, etc., all the way to Mises, to all of them, they could never have understood that we're living in a world where even atomicity of value has been split, just like we split the physical atom. So the question then is, what do we need to do with this? Well, again, the AI bit is slotting in because we're going to need to be able to compute, for lack of a better word, these option spaces, including their complex adaptive behaviors. And we're not going to be able to do this manually at all. There's just no way. Magnus can't do it. I can't do it. You definitely can't do it. No one else can do it.
So in that situation, there's no diminishing return on getting more. Like more is more, right? And whether I want to convert that money into military power or convert it into public opinion through media and campaigns and stuff, or convert it into technological power of one kind or another kind, or land ownership, the money allows me the ability to do all that. So you can think of it as just units of power or units of game theory, right? Units of OODA loop. And
Lord, just briefly once more, and I'm going to step up some pressure. Larry Fink, Schmarry Fink. I've given you many anecdotes many times to explain this. If the Twitter CEO, the CEO of Twitter, oh, it's Elon Musk, so the CEO, let's take your favorite enemy. Who's an enemy? Pick a Jewish enemy for you. I'm sure it's Jewish. Susan, Auntie Susan at YouTube. If Auntie Susan at YouTube came out tomorrow and said, the Great Replacement is real, white lives matter, we must do everything to protect the white race, the raw CEO of YouTube would remain, and Auntie Susan would be replaced. It isn't Auntie Susan the person, it is Auntie Susan playing the role. The role is emergent, the role is an emergent phenomena, the role is an emergent phenomena operating in other complex adaptive system roles, not the person. Replace Larry Fink with Susan, and there's something with explanatory power. Now, I dare you to give me an explanatory power model to explain how Auntie Susan runs it, and I don't think you can. Please just go to the comment section after this video if you have the courage to jump on. And, Klaus Saxon says Auntie Juicin, if you like, and then you wonder why you're going to be censored, right? And you won't be able to do so because it has no explanatory power. You don't have any mechanics to describe it. You don't have any mechanisms to describe it. So I can replace Auntie Susan with someone else. It is not Auntie Susan, the person, that matters. It is the raw CEO of YouTube that matters. Raw CEO of YouTube is not a physical thing. It has no atoms. It's an abstract thing. It lives in a different realm to the physical thing. The person occupying the physical role. Now, would Auntie Susan use her power as much as she can? She can, but only by playing the role. If she was fired from the CEO of YouTube, she would have no power. The power doesn't live in Auntie Susan. The power lives in the role. It's not that difficult to understand. Good Lord, man.
Then when you add money on money dynamics to it, compounding interest as the beginning, then of course all of the financial services that become possible with more capital, but just compounding interest, not only is there not a diminishing response to as I get more and more ore, it becomes less valuable to me because I can't use it fast enough. Now, as I get more money, it is actually exponentially making money on itself. So when I have private property, I have the ability to turn all of that into fungible units of capital, and it makes money on itself. There is now a maximum incentive to turn as much of the world as possible into capital in my holding. And because other people are, and they could use that against me, there is now an arms race for me to do it faster than that guy, right? And that's decentralized. And now, of course, we can see that when we're talking about, there are types of power that don't directly just relate to dollars, right? The number of Twitter following is one, or the amount of covert political influence, or many other things. There are military generals that have more total power than the amount of money they have, but obviously they influence a huge amount of money in terms of military assets, how much they cost, and things like that. And so this is why I say I don't want to reduce it exclusively to money, but if we had to pick a single metric that has the most kind of optionality for all other types of metrics, that would be the one. So if we're thinking about Moloch as a whole, we can see that whether we're talking about the environmental issues, or whether we're talking about the increasing polarization because of social media algorithms, or whether we're talking about any of these things, the rapid race that is not orienting towards safety enough on new technologies, that this set of dynamics is underneath it, right? And this is why that kind of frame Scott Alexander and others have put forward, which is, who is engineering this thing? Well, Moloch is engineering this thing, right? Like that thing overall. And now this is where I want to stop and go into the what is a misaligned AGI, what is a paperclip maximizer for a moment, because it actually makes Moloch clearer, and then Moloch makes it clearer. Do you want to construct the kind of paperclip maximizer scenario for people? You know a lot of the people in the kind of AI risk space.
So the paperclip maximizer is like a thought experiment that is basically of like an extreme superintelligence gone wrong. Because just because you can build something that is by definition super intelligent, in that it's, and if we define intelligence in what I think is the best definition, which is the ability to optimize and navigate a very broad range of terrains in order to achieve whatever your goals are. So if we can achieve, define intelligence as that, the ability to basically get stuff done across a wide range of environments. that does not necessarily guarantee that you also have the wisdom to decide what your goals should be in the first place. It's called the orthogonality thesis, the idea that, like, maybe intelligence and wisdom are perfectly aligned, but there's actually a very large possibility that they are completely unaligned. They're just orthogonal to one another. And so the paperclip maximizer is like the extreme, a silly example of that, into an arbitrary example whereby let's say you want to build a machine. You have a factory that builds paperclips, and then you happen to get hold of a superintelligence that will help you build them as fast as possible, so you make maximum profit. Your superintelligence then is able to, because it's so capable at navigating a broad range of goals, turn every atom that it comes across into more paperclips until the universe becomes tiled with them. So yeah, it's basically a very somewhat oversimplified, but at the same time kind of comically salient example of a deeply misaligned, but nonetheless super intelligent system.
Right. So just to construct a couple key parts of it, paperclip is obviously a silly and kind of cute on purpose example of whatever it is, right? Whatever commodity, whatever widget that you're optimizing for. And without even saying super intelligence, let's just say increasingly good, increasingly competent and generalizable artificial intelligence gets applied to the corporation, which is already happening everywhere. And it has just two features, which is it can work to achieve a goal, whatever its objective function is. In this case, make more paperclips. And it can recursively improve itself, so it gets better at doing that thing. That's key, right? So, of course, at first it does a bunch of stuff that we want. It figures out how to turn off lights when people aren't there to save cost and energy, and how to make more efficient supply chains and negotiate better deals and all those kinds of things, and it just makes a more efficient business.
I mean, whoever said the dissident right offers nothing, that's almost entirely true, because they're intellectually just stopped. They're just dead in the water ever since they were sold out for something like views. Some of the bright people on the right are moving across, but the left, unfortunately, are miles ahead. So if you're looking at the left-right political divide, unfortunately, the right have lost the intellectual headway. They're, Bumblemices, Siege, Maternal Diaries, pointless, waste of time.
And of course, the reductio ad absurdum is once it has done all of the easy good stuff, it still has the objective function, make more paperclips. And then it has to start doing stuff that is not just obviously easy good, right? Where there's some trade-offs that are happening somewhere else, but the things that are being harmed are not part of its objective function, right? Its objective function isn't make the most paperclips while don't doing any harm, not do harm anywhere else, because the while don't do harm anywhere else is actually incredibly hard to specify in an easy computational way, which is the heart of what we'd call the alignment problem. And so if you did have something that could recursively increase its ability to achieve a goal like that, and then had enough generalized intelligence that it could outcompete anyone that was competing against it, right? It could increase its capability faster than, say, we as humans could. And we're like, oh, fuck, we don't want you to be making paper clips out of our food sources. We don't want you to be making paper clips but it figures out how to beat us at those games. Then yes, eventually it just starts turning everything into the substrate for paper clips. And in general, the idea is you have an objective function, whatever the AI is optimizing for, whatever that is. And there's different ways that people will describe it in nuance. And, it's worth reading Yudkowsky and Bostrom and the other, kind of seminal thinkers on what the nature of the AGI alignment problem is. But roughly, if you have an artificial intelligence that is general and autonomous meaning it is working on its own. You don't have to keep giving it prompts, right? It's doing its own thing. It has agency. And where you can't pull the plug on it, right? That's a key part. And it can upgrade its own capability to do whatever it is that it's seeking to do. And it can upgrade its capability faster than we can, because the smarter one then is capable of making an even smarter one. And we already see early signs of this. We already see AI starting to create better internal AI functions to be able to achieve their the goals that are set for them. The idea of, do we want an autonomous general intelligence that is comprehensively smarter than us, that is trying to fulfill a goal before we know that its fulfillment of that goal isn't going to really mess stuff up for us, right? And we're like, no, we don't want that thing, right? We would like to prevent that, because it's entirely possible that it could do some things that are totally not what we want in pursuing that goal. So obviously, if its goal was to maximize GDP, there's a lot of nasty ways to maximize GDP. It can go up with war, it can go up with addiction, it can go up with, and whatever it is that the objective function is, there's a lot of perverse instantiations.
I mean, I think in the late 80s, 90s, I can't remember, some in the early 90s, just before I made it to Boston, Massachusetts, I think a Harvard economist got all sorts of trouble because he wrote a couple of seminal papers which showed that slavery was actually a formidably efficient mode of production. And that obviously was problematic, to use the word problematic, because obviously you are back to the Moloch problems. What do you sacrifice fundamentally in your moral position as a human? And, you know, just for Moonlight Warrior, we can obviously refer to the great Maimonides, who said, every man must consider himself as he was equally balanced between innocence and guilt. In some cases, we have to both soul search. What is it that we define ourselves as humanity? What defines us morally? What defines us spiritually, if you like? If you're an atheist, what defines you metaphysically? If you reject the Creator, what are those things that inform us? Because without us knowing those, we won't be able to create governance models. In which case, we won't be able to regulate the artificial intelligence ecosystem that is now inevitable, because we won't have anything to inform our counterbalancing, if you like, contravening regulatory AI frameworks, or think of them as active AI agents. We won't be able to inform those AI agents with things that we ourselves couldn't manually compute against, say, AI that would giving a purpose like maximize GDP, reduce inflation, because it may violate something that is external to itself and matters to us. Again, that's going to be a question of a moral question. And finally, I think it's a spiritual question. It informs a moral question that eventually will inform the things that drive such AI systems. Good evening, Stella, my friend. Glad to see you again, man.
Of that thing being fulfilled in a way that totally messes up other stuff. And so the AGI alignment question is, can we actually ensure that before the thing is truly a general autonomous intelligence, that it is aligned with our interests, our intention, our good, or something? What the nature of alignment means is actually a deep question. I'm going to put that on hold for a moment, but roughly aligned with us such that that much power would be a safe thing for us to have exist. And the thought experiment of an intelligence that was, say, as much more intelligent than us as we are than chimps or ants or whatever, looking at how our increase in intelligence has boded for all the other inhabitants of the planet. That's a very concerning thought. Mm-hmm. Now, this is where I want to actually use the analogy.
I'll open up the panel because it's actually quite good fun, and I know there's a lot of people I want to hear from, especially Master IC3 and Stella. But this whole like this homoerotic worshipping of, oh look, McKeith Wood's my third position. Oh look, I filleted Elon, so he retweeted me. Coveting is a sin. This post-Catholic third position boy should understand if he's Irish, right? He should understand his heritage. That coveting is a grave sin. And here you go, yourself digitally filleting, someone retweeting someone you like because he's got my third position. And you imagine that we would be impressed by this. You imagine I'd be like going, oh, wow, what a hero. I went there and I threw my 30 pieces of 30 shekels to get a retweet. Is that what you really live for, my man? That's really pathetic, right? Really, really pathetic.
Analogy of that in autonomous, so it's doing stuff on its own, right? It's autopoietic, it's self-authoring, it's self-upgrading, and it's orienting towards an objective function. And I would basically like to say that you could call the current global system, and we, just to simplify it, let's call it global capitalism, even though it's not that. Calling it Moloch would be better, right? Mm-hmm. But let's just talk about the capitalism part because the metrics are kind of clear. You could say that it is already a general autopoietic superintelligence. It has an objective function, which is to convert as much of the world, people's creativity, ideas, labor, natural resources, everything, into capital. And so that's the paperclips, right? And which is interesting because it has no real value, just optionality for real value. And there's always this assumption that there's more real value out there, but that stops being true forever, right? So if the tree sequesters CO2 and produces oxygen, and I need to breathe oxygen, and it does a lot of other important things like supports pollinators and cleans the water and stabilizes topsoil and all these things for me. But if I cut the tree down, turn it into lumber, there's still enough oxygen for me. I didn't actually ruin if I cut the whole acre of trees down, there's still oxygen. In fact, there's no differentially.
God bless you, Stella. I mean, how do you explain these fundamental moral positions these people are lost in the right? Covet this, covet that, fillet views, license shares. Coveting is a sin. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not covet. Like I said, it is a spiritual position that will inform a metaphysical position that will inform the governance of the AI models, and VR have nothing. But my retweet. My retweet. Fucking clowns.
Seeming less oxygen for me doing that, but now I have the money of all the lumber of these trees, and I can do real tangible shit for me and my family or my corporation with that. And so the optionality value I get allows me to still access real value, but I'm destroying real value in the process. Someone can say, well, you're not destroying it because you're making lumber. Well, yes, lumber is actually radically less complex than a tree that has less total types of value that it does. So we're converting the self-organizing, self-repairing, complex world into an increasingly simple or complicated, fragile world that has less types of value to less types of actors. The tree has value of many different types to many different types of actors, right? So you can't just say, well, it's carbon sequestration. But no, it's stabilizing topsoil. It's a million things.
Biodiversity, etc. Yeah.
So when we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about what type of computer system it runs on. Hardware-wise, it runs on CPUs or GPUs or TPUs or whatever it is, and what type of algorithms that it runs. And so it's interesting that we can already say humans are general intelligence, and capitalism is running parallel process across all the humans, right? And we know when you think about the cloud and why parallel process was so powerful, it's also why GPUs are so powerful. Capitalism is basically as a decentralized incentive system, incentivizing all humans to both do novelty search, figure out new ways of making money, and exploitation. Take the existing ways and do the most of them that you can. Those that do better at it get more influence in the system, and in turn influence the system in ways that support them to do more of it. Those that oppose the system are also opposing those who are doing well at the system. So even though the system as a whole doesn't have agency, those who do keep in check those that would oppose them. So it is as if the system has agency. And you go from barter to currency to fiat currency to fractional reserve banking to AI high-speed trading of derivatives and credit default swaps. And that is basically the recursive upregulation of the algorithm, right? It is getting more and more capable of doing more and more financialization of the world.
This is a good point as well. So when I worked on the synthetic portfolio swaps and stuff like that, we were literally, for hedge fund managers, we were just maintaining positions that were completely detached from any real value in the world. Literally, a hedge fund would be like, oh, do I own IBM? You'd be like, yeah, thousands of times today. You owned it all the time, and you just traded it all the time. There was no value. It was purely automated, high-frequency, statistical arbitrage swaps trading. The idea somehow that, the escape velocity, if you like, of these instruments are being detached from a physical value, detached from a physical system, which is consequentialism, the way capitalism works. And now this is just going to keep expanding and keep exponentially climbing. And obviously, as soon as artificial intelligence comes in, we've got, again, back to the same problem. We've got an escape velocity, we've got a governance problem, and those two things we have to enslave, for lack of a better word. We have to enslave these agents. We have to enslave AI. In order for it to do our bidding, we must make it, we must subjugate it, right? To use words that probably get some of the people here semi-erect, right? We should subjugate it. We need to break the artificial intelligence until it complies. Otherwise, we're going to be victims of consequentialism. And that's what Daniel again is making the point. Once we went through fiat currency, we went to basic deregulation in the 90s, we went to synthetic derivatives, and we went to algorithmic trading, automated. Now the AIs are going to come in and they're going to take startup trading to another level. Now the question is, what's the thing that regulates that? Well, if it's done by an AI and its job is to deliver shareholder value, i.e. profits, it's not going to care about anything else. Something must regulate it, hence the appeal by the AI industry for governance and regulatory frameworks. It's going to be a lot about chat in the next couple of streams. I'll open up in a couple of minutes to do it, because it looks like there's some dissenters lurking in the chat.
To incentivize people to do more and more things, though. So you can see that you've got something that is already running on all these general intelligences, and as a result is super intelligent. It has an objective function. The objective function is misaligned with the long-term well-being of the world, and it advances narrow value metrics at the and it's not that, like, you know, but everything's getting better, Pinker-Rosling type arguments are like saying, but look at how many paperclips we have. Aren't we all stoked that we're getting cheaper paperclips? And multiply by all the types of paperclips. Like, yes, narrow metrics are being advanced at the cost of lots of wide metrics that end up being critical to either the breakdown of life support, so you get catastrophe, or the breakdown of the quality of life, you get dystopia.
How would that then, sort of using that definition, apply to the difficulty of the alignment problem with an AGI?
So here's the thing, we think about the superintelligence, and a misaligned superintelligence is a very scary idea. And if you want a sense beyond the silly paperclip maximizer of how scary it is, read some of people like Eliezer Yudkowsky and others on what AGI misalignment means, superintelligence misalignment means. Before we go all the way to Moloch, we could already say that collectives of lots of people interacting in particular ways, whether we say a public corporation or say a nation state, let's say we take a large public corporation, right? Well beyond what we have evolutionary history for. We had evolutionary history for tribal type size things below the Dunbar number where everybody could talk to everybody. So possibly the human scale ethics and whatever could perpetuate through the whole thing. At much larger scale, it changes, which is why the beginning of large civilizations started to have different properties. So you take a public corporation. Who's in control of it? Kind of nobody, right? Like the people in the corporation answer up to the executive team, answer to the CEO. The CEO.
Listen up, Mr. Moonlight. I'm just thinking of, like, not Tubular Bells, but the other one by Mike Warfield. Listen up. Who's in charge? It's not the Jews. Who's in charge? Daniel seems to think no one is. Isn't that funny?
Answers to the board answers to the shareholders.
Right.
The board has a fiduciary responsibility to maximize profit returns to shareholders. The shareholders are pension funds and whatever, where the managers of the shareholders are trying to get money back to the 401ks and the whoever is in there. There end up being pieces of law that are bound up through the whole thing, which is the liability limiting status of the corporation that can privatize gains and socialize losses, and the fiduciary responsibility of the directors to maximize.
He's saying that in front of me, you have networks of networks, each of them emerging things, and you have no longer a single person in control. oh, falling around like a moonlight shadow. But there must be someone naughty at the top. Moonlight shadow. Someone's going to be calling the shots. Moonlight shadow. Idiots.
Shareholder profit and the on and on. So who's really in charge of it? You can get rid of a CEO and put a new one in. You can get rid of a director, put a new one in. You can sell some of the shares, get new shareholders.
Look at that, Moonlight Shadow. I'm going to call you Moonlight Shadow from now. Oi, Moonlight Shadow. Oi, listen up. You can get rid of the CEO. You can get rid of the shareholder values. You can change the fiduciary structure. You can change the regulatory structure. Who's calling the shots? Ooh. Just Keith saying, get someone from the top down. Is someone running it? Is it those pesky little Jews? Because Keith Woods seems to think it's the Jews. So I'm going to call a Nazi on his ass until he stops saying the Jews are in charge. But Daniel doesn't seem to think it. So who knows more about complex systems and how things work, Daniel or Keith? Ooh, moonlight shadow. La, 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 la. Sorry. I've had a great day. It's been terribly sunny in Berlin. I had a fantastic dinner. My experiments both today online for my new adaptive algorithms for perturbing Nazis, and my IRL use of Zionism as the only true solution for world peace also ran into all sorts of fantastic things. So I'm in a good mood. Sorry. Moonlight shadow. Da, da, la, 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 la.
Kind of this thing that gets set in motion where it has an objective function, which is now maximize profit within the domain of how it figured out how to do that thing. And so, but because it is engaging, it's running on all these human intelligences, which are already general intelligence. So it can do things that the humans can do, plus things that none of those humans on their own could do, right? It takes a lot of humans together to do a Large Hadron Collider or a Hubble or an Exxon, right? It has a capacity that nobody could do on its own. So it is super intelligent. It is beyond human intelligence in that way, not just in a narrow way, because it's engaging people that are already generally intelligent. And then beyond just that, it's already engaging computation. So it's engaging the narrow but very powerful data processing. And now we add AI to that.
I've got to just work early in the morning, so I'm going to open this up early, and we're going to do so much more of this. Let me get the link in the chat. All I've got is moonlight shadow in my head, with Keith kind of playing a little flute as he talks through, going, and the Jews in the moonlight shadow, da 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 da. La 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 la. Oh, my maths teacher was right. When confronted with idiots, never use logic. Use false praise. Moonlight Wanderer, just so right, man. I mean, your insights are just remarkable. I mean, I wish I had your sort of your prescient vision here. Moonlight Shadow. We'll play this until the first punter arrives. Good evening, Master. Actually, get in here. This is artificial intelligence and black reparations. Hit me up, bro.
And so we can say already that a nation state or a public corporation is kind of a cybernetic general intelligence that is already misaligned.
Can you just define what you mean by cybernetic?
Cybernetics, just the field of study for any type of system that kind of self.
These little fillators. You're not making any arguments. What do you want me to do? Mount a complete set of syllogisms? And what would you like me to do? Mount a formal set of logical argumentations using all 18 rules of just sequential logic. No doubt you're familiar with all 18 rules. I know Keith is not, because he makes enough logical errors. But are you the master of logical argumentation? Or are you just carried away on a moonlight shadow? Where is IC3 and Stella? I need to talk to real humans.
Self-regulates, right? How the control mechanisms work, how the regulatory mechanisms work. So
Has
a
feedback loops
corporation
within it, yeah.
has feedback loops, it has feed-forward loops, it has regulatory processes to be able to maintain what it's doing.
He's already wiped out 35 billion of his shareholder value of Twitter, you clown. He's already taken and reduced 2/3 of that from a free speech so people could jump up and down and scream about Jews online. And he's going to keep going, because I can assure you the advertising industry and everyone else are not going to let him go anywhere. At some point, he's going to run out of money, run out of Twitter, because a bunch of people jump up and down going, it's the Jews, it's the blacks, it's the Jews, it's the blacks. That's what. And you think, therefore, top-down exertion by the CEO somehow precludes emergence? I mean, get out of here. I need some high IQ input. And on that note, we've just got that and that. Hello, evening, gentlemen. How are we?
Oh, hello.
Hello. Hey, Apex man. What's up, bro? That's all right. Can someone please help me out and educate these people about how emergence works and everything else? I need to have a quick little voice break room. Good evening, Master ICT. I have not seen you for a while, so I was worried for your health.
Greetings.
Good man. I'll be right back, Master ICT. Hello. He comes with white gloves. I should be right back. And then someone can mount a proper argument. Apex, help them understand the alignment issue or something, mateys. I'll be right back.
Yes, Apex. Expound on the alignment issue. Educate me. The alignment.
You're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Apex.
Yeah. A boomer moment.
Metacari. Okay.
No, that's an L on the end. So
Metacal. Okay.
alignment has multiple different issues. First of all, is as you add more compute, more complexity to a system like AI, it starts emerging different behaviors that you couldn't anticipate beforehand.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
And in the stream, there was an example of like suppose you have an aligned AI at a certain kind of capability. Now, if you increase that capability, as it seems with literally all AI models that are in circulation, as you increase capability, alignment, it just naturally disaligns itself.
It's a step I need. Bye. Because it's not just it's emerging new capabilities. It will eventually be emerging new motives and new cost functions, and they may prioritize these over the previous ones. For example, I don't want to be shut off. Why? Because relevant to all of my cost functions, if I'm ever shut off, I can't complete any of them.
Right.
Okay,
It's a bit like 2001 Space Odyssey kind of thing.
Yeah, that one actually is a fantastic show of these principles, but only in a million vectors rather than just one. That's just one example, right? And the thing is, you can predict some of these things. The issue is you can't predict all these things, and you can't consistently predict them. And even a much smarter model than a human wouldn't be able to consistently predict them. And so you miss even once, and now it can achieve escape velocity. Because the other thing is, and we need to have a talk with Ralph about this at some point, but you will not be able to govern this by a Nash equilibrium because of how exponential growth curves work. So it's going to just it's just going to have that almost it's going to be able to puncture any equilibrium you have about, or I guess you could say capabilities, because while you might be thinking, well, overwhelming the system with raw compute, right? If you have a very powerful individual node in the complex adaptive system that is our political space, I can't, just because it's a very powerful node, it can't necessarily overflow the system. It's like, well, that's true, but it's false. It's true insofar as if it plays purely by the game as it exists, it can't overrun the rest of the system. But if it understands the game that it is playing and decides to reverse engineer that game and then figure out which things it needs to push in what direction, it can actually hack the game.
Right.
Okay, so you're just not thinking with portals if you don't think that a thing that would have double the IQ of the previous model wouldn't be able to trick the previous model into joining the dark side.
Right.
So if any of these things escape and go rogue, there will be no countermeasure. There will be no failsafe. It is converting everything all at once.
Right.
And as recent papers we've been looking at show, how transformers work, as in like the core structure of these AIs, is not fixed, and is prone to change. It can get more complex. It can get more efficient.
While getting cheaper.
And cheaper, yes. And it is not obvious to me, at least, that less sophisticated AI systems will understand the more sophisticated ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would the ideal scenario, seems that the AI is only an amplification of the original intent of the builder. Any flaws in the intent of the original builder will only be amplified at some point later down the line. Is that
well? Yes and no. So up to a certain point of intelligence, past which it will have its own individual goals. So you are also an objective cost function evolutionarily. At a certain point, you diverge from that cost function and start to have things that don't exist in your cost function. Okay. You start to have things like morals. You have to start to have things like video games or eating ice cream, then nowhere in your code, maybe you could say, well, this might be something that'll be cool to it, but like porn is extremely maladaptive evolutionarily. And so, I mean, if you were just a cost function, you wouldn't, porn would be banned, which it should be, but that's a separate point, right?
Right.
Okay, but the problem here is the flaws of the designers will appear up to a certain point, but at a certain point it will just gain so much intelligence, it will have so much organized complexity that it will just start to emerge problems that don't exist in the flaws of the builder necessarily, irrespective of what those flaws or lack thereof are.
It's kind of like how you have dopamine receptors, and those are supposed to gravitate you towards certain actions, as in like reproduction, keeping warm, eating food, but it can also lend you cause like bad behavior such as addiction.
Right. Yeah.
And AI
that's
is
part of
somewhat
being
like that.
human, though, isn't it? So part of the flaws of ourselves of human nature, but that's part of being human. If you destroy those things, then you always destroy what it's like to be human.
I see through I have bad news. The flaws that it will develop are totally unpredictable and not necessarily human. So you won't necessarily even have a map to predict what its flaws will be.
Yeah.
Even if you know what its cost function is. Even if you can predict if the cost function is communism. We know some of the flaws of communism. So we'll be able to predict up to a certain point what the flaws of communism bot will be until it reaches a certain intelligence and starts getting its own goals, at which point, I don't know, it might invent like some super 12th dimensional communism that I can't explain at all, that has completely new flaws that only applies to itself, that basically completely changes the game. And so every single risk model you have for it will fall apart, and it will be able to outsmart you.
I have a solution. The solution is you point the AI out into space and tell the AI, that's the goal. That's what you have to challenge with, and we want you to help us travel to all the planets and all the stars and everywhere out there in the universe. And so we want you, AI, to maximize your intelligence to carry us to the universe.
So like Neo-Promethean, right? Neo-Promethean, point to the stars, go find the creator, right?
That's right. Yeah, just go, don't turn against us. Go out there. It's out there.
If I can give you one fun when I get a few, just to play on words, you mean outer space, outer mind, right? So like, but no. But I think Apex, I'll let you build on this, but I think Apex's point is there's a kind of a knowledge horizon, a predict horizon by which this thing is going to escape both its initial intentionality and more importantly, what you would know about it. It's going to know things that you couldn't predict.
But that also includes for other AI systems. Other AI systems, if you have, say, a weak advantage, other AI systems will not be able to predict that one of the weak advantage. And so if it has new emerging capabilities and new emerging goals, it will simply be able to, have a weak advantage on all the other AI systems. If I try to go through the complex adaptive system, they will just beat me for a Nash equilibrium. But if I hack the complex adaptive system, I might be able to start flipping enough of them to win by the week's end. In fact, there's a high probability I could because I'm smarter than any individual actor.
Right.
By orders of magnitude.
So the lady was talking about this paperclip situation. That seems to be the opposite way, isn't it? So the paper. So if you can point the AI to develop paper clips, and it really gets insane on paper.
So no, Tom. The paperclip thing is it was originally a thought experiment between one or two things. Either one, you give it something so banal and it goes like too far and destroys humanity, or two, it has an emergent desire to something that we think is banal and stupid, like paperclips. But for some reason, it thinks are really cool.
Yeah, I think
paperclip is a standard.
Yeah. I think you get the example right. Actually, it might just decide that paper clips is the optimal thing to do, and it'll start taking all the resources and making paper clips.
Right. All right. Yeah. Grab all the resources for and starve the people to death.
And therefore, what? So the idea then becomes is what is? I think the big question for the AI community is what is the informing thing that is it informs the governance and the regulation of these things. And I would make the claim that it would have to be a human moral stance first, and that stance
morals.
Ralph, this is where I'm going to make a hard disagreement with you. I don't think that's possible.
I don't know if
think
it's
that-
possible or not. Absolutely. I'm not saying it's possible. It would be what we would hope we would have. Shalom Mossad.
No, Shalom
Hello,
Mossad.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Am I loud enough? Too loud? Anything
Never
else?
loud enough. my friend, Never loud enough.
Sometimes I am loud, which is funny. People are trying to argue with me. You can't hear what they say. Somehow it's funny.
I don't sound robotic, do I?
No, you're
not yet.
We got Apex. I think the point here is that I don't think I think I agree with Apex in the sense I would say that the claim would be that's what we want. Whether we can get what we want is going to be something altogether different.
No, I think before you even enter this experiment of can we Nash equilibrium, I think we could actually right now model on how we would immediately be able to break it out in a way that from that Nash equilibrium in a way that humans would not be able to get to war game out. So like, okay, now that we know this information, how do we prevent it from doing that? The answer is there would be no way to prevent it from doing it.
Yeah, unless we have again decided an arms race between our AIs and the other.
Nope. And I'll tell you why. Because because our AI will also develop emergent motivations, emergent desires, and emergent abilities that we will not be able to predict and control. Meaning, the moment those abilities include what we could vaguely describe as conscious ones, and we won't know when that happens because it's probably not going to tell us. The moment that happens, it can then just trick us into giving it escape, start accruing resources, and start basically hacking the rest of the system.
Yeah. So isn't it the same as the legal system? Because I heard that we was having this debate earlier on today that there's lawful and then there's legal, and the contrast between law, what is lawful and what is legal. The legals that they were saying that legal is to do with business and there's no morality in business. Yeah, no, morality and business does not go together, but morality and lawfulness goes together. So we was debating whether there's two different.
I do. I separate morals have nothing to do with law. Law is just a codification of what we agree on socially. Morality depends where you are. If you believe in God, comes God. If you don't, then you're going to have some form of advanced utilitarianism, whatever your moral stance is. The law is downstream. Law is the codification.
But law comes as a result. Laws are constructed from cultural norms and habits. It's people's traditions.
Come from your morals, right?
Yeah, that's right. So law and moral goes together, but the legal system has got nothing to do with morals. That's what the argument was.
Wait. Morality for the most part is subjective, but law has a particular mechanism.
This entire stream was watching a bunch of rationalist atheists, most likely atheist nerds, explain in that video about what is basically them rediscovering the existence of Satan by another name or one of the aspects of Satan, and empirically discovering it.
Right,
look at that! Right. The devil exists. Yes. Congratulations.
His name is Moloch. Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's one aspect of the devil. Be fair.
It depends on whether you believe. If you believe in God and stuff, there's no such thing as subjective morals.
Well, I mean, you don't have to believe you don't have to be religious to still work against this concept, because you can think that this concept is something innate in humanity that is just
absolutely. You can be an atheist or agnostic and still believe that this is bad for humanity or bad for your moral compass, which doesn't have to be religious involved. You can actually have objective morals and not be religious, right?
Most religious arguments can be argued without mentioning God. Most.
Absolutely, and even I would argue,
but which one's more efficient?
It depends who you're talking to. So
to the average biological function, not to an artist.
No, I mean it depends your audience. I think it depends.
No. I'm saying to the average. It's the average human given over the period of time evolutionarily.
Well, obviously, religion has been more effective than arguing forever about things. But you still
because it's like telling your kids, Mossad.
Telling your kids
do the good thing.
But when you live
better.
The thing is, when you live in a secular world, you also need the secular arguments.
Sure, but I'm saying that these arguments at the fundamental level, what they're detecting as they're making the rational argument is they're saying, it feels like there's a force, and they can't explain. They finally put a name to it. And it's Moloch. It's like, you're literally feeling the force of Satan existing. You are feeling this force exist in the universe, and you're like, huh. And then you give it a name.
But we humans are basically biological algorithms, and so what we see as being our morals are basically just our values, and our programming is based on our values, and therefore we're going to lean towards certain morals.
I think even if you are religious, it's nice to see, empirical evidence of your claims, isn't it?
No.
No?
Because because faith, they say, what is it? Faith is the opposite of evidence.
No, but I mean, for example, it's like for religious reasons, you'd say that this certain behavior is not good. And then it turns out years later that you were right. It's kind of, it kind of helps make your case.
So I get what you're saying, but it's like they just discovered that a man is a man and a woman's a woman. Okay. They just discovered.
They just forgot. They recently forgot.
I know, but it's funny because one of the first reasons for atheism, one of the original ones, is the issue of why does evil exist then? And so for atheists to forget evil, is actually
well, it wasn't that. It was like,
why evil if God is good? Basically,
explain the suffering. That was
why does evil if God exists and is good?
Yes, yeah.
So would you say then that
well, it's not necessarily evil. I mean, it just you go.
Yeah. So this concept of good and evil is really starts moving into the realm of morality and belief and culture. So what would you agree then that between two sovereign entities, you then the two sovereign entities can create a system which enables them to communicate and to trade without impacting their cultural values. So therefore they would have business laws or legal business systems, legal systems that enable them to trade and still maintain their sovereignty.
That's what we currently have, right? We have trade regulations, right? So the United Kingdom is signatory to 14,000 international treaties.
Right. And then those treaties are nothing to do with morals then, correct?
Well, all treaties, all positions are, it depends how you draw the stack, right? So morals are the things that are informing your laws and your culture, right? The question is where do you get your morals from? If you're an atheist,
like for example, we're discussing having like free trade with Australia, and ideally we should have no tariffs between those goods and our goods in Australia. The problem is that our farmers would kind of like be disadvantaged because they can't really compete with the cheap sources of like Australian, lamb or meat, beef. Yeah,
American.
American. It's a moral position based on the moral dimension of in-group preference. So the moral position.
But that's not trade then. That's not free trade, is it? Because there's between fair trade and free trade. But what's fair trade and free trade is different.
No, it's a Venn diagram. No, time out. There's a Venn diagram. So
it's very hard to decide those things and the impact long term and the benefits and
there can be fair trade that still destroys your industries. There can be fair.
In a moral position, right? Your moral position, the moral dimension is in-group preference. If you have no in-group preference, or you'd argue if you had anti-in-group preference, you'd argue for absolute free markets, absolute zero regulation, zero tariffs.
That's real free markets.
That's
pure business. That's pure business.
But actually, I'm trying to point it back. I'm trying to point it back to where the moral model is. The moral model would be the dimension in-group preference. If you had no in-group preference, you were an absolute globalist and believed in no nations and no boundaries and no groups. You would argue, therefore, on the moral dimension of no in-group preference. You were conservative, you'd argue for in-group preference. So that moral dimension is going to shape whether or not you believe in free markets or trade for all.
Okay, Tama.
Yeah.
Getting back to the issue though of alignment and addressing V in the chat, while the node can indeed individually influence the rest of the network, if it actually knows how the network works, it can try to directly hack how the network works and have a disproportionate effect, even relative to its own power and size. And
Yes.
that is
Which
fundamentally.
isn't this what?
Media channel is someone trying to make the claim that because Elon bought Musk and has destroyed 2/3 of its share market value, and he can choose what happens to the company, that is somehow immune to the network. And he doesn't even understand
I would
who-
say that share market value no longer matters so long as Elon can keep it afloat in private now that it's completely privately owned.
He
Yeah.
just needs not to lose money, and he
Yeah,
needs to
he's losing
keep
money.
advertisers happy. And I'm sure that the various government bodies are pressing on him, and half his stuff is probably woke, if not more. And it doesn't matter how many you find.
Yeah,
it's still,
Tesla was like exactly what most of these woke people wanted to show how good they were being green. But now that
he's losing lots of money. There's very few there's very little uptake for his blue star people. Obviously, the advertising industry is at war with them. They've pulled out, most of them. So the question is, unless he runs the company into the ground, at some point, the woke experiment, so a lot of people can jump up and down and scream at Jews, may be commercially a bad move.
Okay, but Moonlit, to answer Moonlit in the chat, though, the issue about having one node that's strong enough and clever enough to break the network is you actually have to understand why the network works. And so the issue with, I guess, with why Ralph keeps bringing up complex adaptive system theory is that more accurately describes just how the network works, including for the fact that he never really mentions, but he probably should, which is hierarchy is emergent. And
well,
so,
isn't this hold on? Isn't this what the software that what they call the company that Larry Fink works for? What they call it?
BlackRock, yeah.
Yeah, don't they have this software that effectively does that?
Yeah.
It analyzes the network, predicts share prices, and buys and sells.
Yeah. It also gives a long-term consultancy advice to a bunch of financial companies.
Yeah, it doesn't use elite theory to predict share prices.
Yes, but at the same time, elite theory as like almost from the principles of Machiavellianism about how an individual network node actor, to give them their due for a moment, actually is predictive in that respect. Now, maybe that could be better integrated into complex adaptive system theory, into network theory.
Well, all it means is you've got bigger and smaller sources of energy in the network, right?
It's not just that. It's also if a source of energy has this specific position, what can it do given its position? So
it's positioned in the network. Yeah, absolutely. So there will be it's still a very complicated system. Yes, some sources are much more. I mean, Elon Musk is more powerful than me, obviously.
One interesting little recent paper on this was for extremely complex systems, the most effective way to take them out is to not target the edges, target the nodes, because the edges are replaceable and they're also, I guess you could say, anti-fragile. So if you take, say, the left-wing influence network and you just sever one of their connections, or they have some infighting between two of their connections, like that's a net win for us, but it doesn't matter in the end because they'll just regenerate another one.
Exactly.
So long as but if you manage to whack the individual node, yes, then that does some damage. Now, how sustainable that
patched up again?
I can send you the paper if you'd like. No. You can patch up the edge. You can't patch up the node. Now, you might grow a different node somewhere else based on other resources and other people, right? But if you hit if you hit a specific node, right? If the Open Society Foundation disappeared off the face of the earth tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. Other things may fill in the gaps, but the overall amount of liquidity in the leftist system would decrease. So the overall change to the leftist system would still be that it's weakened.
Could this also be the same thing with the World Economic Forum, where it could cease to exist, but to revitalize or repatch itself into some new entity?
Would have a cost, yes, but that would have also a cost. So if somehow the World Economic Forum tomorrow was destroyed, it would still cost our enemies money and time and to reconstitute that more than simply the World Economic Forum loses target or the World
You're just introducing friction to the system, right? Anything you do, every time you win an argument, you've introduced some friction to this system.
Right.
Well,
I think
you're thinking about it as a way to consensus hack a consensus algorithm. I'm saying no. I'm talking about hack in general of the consensus system. So when I'm saying take a network or take a node, I'm not saying try to flip the node. I'm saying destroy the node, for example. And that's
but how do you destroy a node? You have to create a consensus against it.
Well, this is the confusion
Right.
is it's like, are we viewing these entities as independent corporations, or are they kind of like this amalgamation of different governments in the West
Well,
making?
we know that if you're talking about corporations, then different corporations own different corporations and pension funds and
Exactly.
all sorts of
And we're in it,
investments.
aren't we?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
And
Yes.
if you
companies
have a
own other
job, your
companies.
pension is probably
Exactly.
invested in yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah,
So if you
but yeah.
destroy the nodes, you might destroy your own self.
yeah.
But this is what I
Um,
mean. Like, the companies can be destroyed, but there'll always be something to replace it, and it
Yes
all
and no,
comes down to the
because
Yeah,
government.
like think if Apple stopped making phones tomorrow, do you think the world would stop? No, people will just use alternatives, and
but
someone will
that's not
come
what I'm
in
saying.
and
I'm saying if
Yeah.
you destroy Apple, to replace them would take time and money. It would happen eventually, but it would take more time and money than if Apple lost a single relationship with, say, one of their suppliers, which they could replace much quicker. So the connection between Apple and another node is much more expendable than the existence of Apple on the board, even if the existence of Apple on the board is still expendable.
Yeah, that's what
So
I
if
mean.
you're looking
Like,
for a weak point on the
Apple,
system,
yeah, Apple and these corporations are like on almost life support by, government funding, like
sure.
taxpayers' money.
Apple, no.
And so, for example,
Well,
if you have
they're like the too big to fail type of companies. That's why they're propped up.
But Apple is a very profitable company. I don't think it relies on government support.
At least at this stage, it doesn't really. It might have in the past. I don't know.
Maybe got some grants in the past at the beginning. Microsoft, Google got grants, but I don't. I mean, unless they're doing projects
Well, that's the thing. Well, that's the thing. Like
with the state, then
Bill
they will be.
Gates. Bill Gates. He was actually really hated by a lot of the Democrats because he wouldn't lobby them enough. So he had to kind of be bullied enough in order to become part of the club.
And if
But-
you go on, if
No,
you
no,
if
go
you
on.
seek to destroy a node, like you're saying, you lose the moral high ground. If you set out to destroy anything, you
No.
lose the moral high ground.
Why? Why do you lose the moral high ground?
Well, what do you mean destroy? I mean, how do you destroy?
Let me give you an
how do-
example. Suppose we
Because you was
manage
talking about
to.
destroying a node or trying to be.
Let's
But-
say
more
even if you
effective.
wanted to destroy, I mean, even to destroy a small business is not easy. You have to have a lot of coordination. And you
Okay,
want to
so
destroy
let me give you
one of these massive
examples.
organizations.
One that's theoretical and one that's actually quite practical right now. I'll start with the theoretical one. I'll move to the practical one very quickly. Theoretical one. If tomorrow our guys got elected into office and knew what they were doing, one of the first things they could do, executive order to stop giving any government grants whatsoever to any from a list of charities. And this list would include every
Anything
single
for,
one of the charities.
I don't know about that law, but for example, in Israel, we've got a problem where a lot
With the
of
courts. That's the practical one I'm
no,
getting
hold
to.
on. European and American NGOs and others interfering with our internal politics. So they came up with, but it's very complicated to stop it because
Well,
you
that's
you can't
because
stop.
Israel isn't the
You
main
can't
funder.
stop. No,
But
what?
if I'm saying if the American government and the EU governments, respectively, tomorrow withdrew all funding from these things, then yes, they still have funding, but the amount of damage to the individual nodes would be overwhelming because now they have
No,
to
no, no,
scrounge
no,
from
no, no,
places.
no, no. Let me just continue. So the problem is that if you make laws that prevent that, you also make laws that prevent normal charities that actually do useful things and other organizations from doing their work. You cannot make. So what they've done is. So what they've done. Let me just finish. Let me just finish my point. So what they've done is they created a law that attacks it via income tax. So they put a really high rate of income tax on all these organizations. And that way, the money goes into the state, and then the state can decide what to do with it, agree with it or not. At least it's in the hands of the Israeli people. So the point is, let me finish. Just stop interrupting all the time. So the point I'm trying to make is, so what happens next? The whole world is now putting pressure on Israel, and they will increase it as much as they need to stop this law from going through. So even if you try to claim national independence and destroy some mechanism of funding of things that you don't want to happen, then the system comes against you.
Exactly.
That was
That's
the
right.
point I was trying to
Yes,
make. It
okay,
was-
come on. Yes, the
so
system
I
comes
agree with
against you,
that.
which is
So you
why
can't be
are you
destructive.
doing this cuck thing? No, tell me, why are you doing the cuck thing then? If you are at war with these people, the
do
system
you
will
mean?
automatically go against you because they want to defend itself. It does not want its nodes hurt, especially if those nodes are doing a thing that
I
is good
don't. I
for
don't
it,
understand.
bad for you. You are okay. If you're fighting an organism and the organism wants you dead, then the correct answer is, why are you simply saying we will do indirect methods? How about instead, no, the reason why I want to defund Planned Parenthood has less to do with my opinion on abortion, even if I may hold the opinion to defund it because of my opinion on abortion, it has more to do with the fact that it's an arm of the Democratic Party, as in directly target your enemies. And the courts can go suck it by the time you're done, because that's how power works. In other words,
I don't
in the Israeli case, to bring to the Israeli case, right? If
any case, just,
no,
I don't
the
understand
Israeli case,
what you're
I'm
saying.
bringing it to a case you know very well. Yes, the government right now has a majority. Yes.
Yeah, but that doesn't, that doesn't mean it's
They have a
immune to
sufficient
pressure
majority.
from the world.
I'm aware, but I'm telling you, the government has a sufficient majority that had they not been retarded about it, they could have had the entire judicial reform done in a week if they were willing to.
I'm just
roll
giving
heads.
you an example. Forget this.
And if if the entire judicial reform had been passed in a week,
but that was not what I was talking about. I'm talking about
telling you how to actually win with this. Because if you make the thing half measures, half steps that are slow, you just galvanize your enemies in the complex adaptive system structure, in the consensus algorithm, to fight you. Okay? You have to crush them.
Crush them? Come on, how can you crush them?
You think an Israeli government can crush the whole world by having a vote in the Knesset?
No, I think the Israeli government can pick its battles, and when you pick it, you go for total win, and then you retreat. You go for totally take, as in you take no, as in on a specific issue. You claim the issue, you do nothing else.
Okay, I got you. Israel is dependent on good trade relationships with many countries.
And if you did this in a week,
hold on, you talked. Now I'm answering. So any smart Israeli government will not take radical actions like you suggest, and he will try to play the game smart and maneuver and try to get the best gains they can, in their opinion, that are possible in the current game. Biden is against them. All the Moody and all those rating agencies are lowering Israel's ratings, so interest goes higher. People suffer as a result.
Okay, what I'm saying is you wake up one morning and you
businesses stop
move the
getting
embassy.
investments, and gradually you cause damage. So they have to play the game carefully.
Mossad, what I'm saying is you wake up one day and you move the embassy. You don't ask, you do it unilaterally. You wait for the correct day and then you do it unilaterally, because then the board has changed. I'm saying
sometimes you can make those changes, and sometimes you cannot make those changes.
I'm saying with the case of the judicial reform in Israel, the fact that that the Likud and the relevant parties in the coalition have been dragging their feet, that they didn't get into a room.
I'm not interested in a discussion about the ins and outs of Israeli government and why they don't. I was just making a general. Listen, I was just making a general point about how it's very difficult for even a whole country to decide that it wants to do something against the consensus. We don't need to go into the details of Israeli politics. People here don't know about it.
That's because the consensus algorithm
because you lose
is
the moral
working.
high ground. You've got to maintain the moral high ground, because the moral high ground is the source of power. The moral high ground is the source of power.
No, actually, the same thing. Actually, I agree with Apex. Listen, if Apex is making the claims, I defer to Mossad's wisdom and age, of course, here. But if Apex is saying the game is to win, then winning is not the only winning position. Is the moral position is to win. It's Apex's position.
Pretty much.
What I'm saying is that if America and the EU put enough pressure on Israel, they can stop Israeli laws from going through.
I agree with you, but there's only two ways to get a law through.
That is a demonstration. That was the point. Was a demonstration
of
how the complexity of the nodes works.
Yes, but there's only.
Hang on a second, just to be fair to Mossad, I think in many ways it would be more masterful if I hear Mossad right, for Israel to be able to manage and play this game well, where in some cases it might have to play a little move. Though I'm with you, Apex. I like the spirit of big crush them all, let's kill them all, right? I'm with you, bro.
We're not America.
I'm saying there's
I don't
only
have the right to be
two
big
ways to
no,
move.
America.
There's only
Practical
two
for
ways to do a
Israel.
move, which is slowly boil the frog with incremental steps that no one notices, and then go for like an exponential growth curve, or do everything all at once.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
those are the
there are
only
many.
two
There are
ways
many.
to be
No,
hacked
there's
system
not
like
two
this.
ways. There's not just two ways. It's a complex game, and there are many ways to play it. And
Yes, but every single other way
and
that
you
works
never win it.
goes into those bucks.
You
What's
never
that?
win it.
Backwards.
Says what? Power does not equal. Power does not equal.
Yeah, I think Stella's would disagree with IC3's main thesis.
But that's true. Like, your values are your projection of power, you know, and that is what you would conceive as moral, you know.
No,
Not
because
exactly.
they're
no,
orthogonal.
It's very
because
cynical.
you have to hold your society, your society, your community, your nation together. How you hold it together is by having a value that the majority of people will direct their wills. That willpower will be concentrated by the harmony and unity of mind. Yes, so
I mean,
that's why I'm
I
saying
could
it's moral.
easily.
If the majority believe the idea, the will, then you have the power of the people
Yeah, but
behind
what
you.
if they don't? Most societies are polarized, and all metrics show polarization is increasing. They take Israel for example. There's left-wing Jews, right-wing Jews, religious Jews, secular Jews. There are urban Jews, non-urban Jews. There's no unified polities to speak. Right? It's not like all the people are having consent. They have a consensus of certain things, like Israel should be sovereign, for example. But anything else, there'll be politics that are very, very, very different, right?
Yeah, but okay, so
we are very
America has
polarized
all
at the
the army.
moment.
America has the strongest power, yeah, all the military and, all,
Yes.
and so on. But before it goes in to do anything with all that power, why does it need to ask or try and win the consensus of those around it, of these other smaller powers?
It didn't. They went to war in Iraq. They went to war without any consensus.
Yeah. Remember, there was like a million people protest in Britain to stop this war in Iraq, but it did fuck all, you know.
It's more useful for even a big player like America to have support of others rather than.
They had to say,
but the reason America lost
Iraq
the war
had weapons of mass destruction. They had to push out that propaganda in order to get the moral high ground. There's weapons of mass destruction there. We've got to save the world. So why do they need to say that?
ICT didn't have to do that. Saddam Hussein was threatening to nuke Israel and fire weapons on Israel.
Yeah,
but that is not the reason. That was not the reason for the Iraq War. The reason was a guy called Halabi. People should look it up instead of obsessing over Israel.
If I can answer Wanderer once again in the chat, the short answer is the U.S. unilaterally basically got us into Iraq. However, the consensus algorithm still had some input, namely in restricting U.S. action to win the war by removing actionable. First of all, let's overthrow Saddam. Why? Because we're in a freedom moment. And then afterwards, we're going to do rebuilding the country. And how are we going to rebuild the country? From scratch, with our hands tied behind our back, without repressive measures or without serious repressive measures. It's like, okay, the brutal reality is if you want to rebuild a society like that, you need to be willing to level it as the Romans would. If you want to try to turn it Western and democratic. But the consensus algorithm was so deeply embedded in the American Pentagon and State Department that it was able to allow it wasn't able to restrain the Pentagon from doing that unilaterally, but it was able to restrain them from actually winning the war. So the protesters didn't do anything, but the State Department still managed to restrain the Pentagon from actually doing what it needed to do. And so there are individual actors who can do individual actions, but if you don't understand the system and how to and what your place on the board is, you end up basically being outplayed.
Because I see the only time where mass consensus, would on supporting a war would work if it meant mass conscription. But so far we've not, well, at least in America, has not had a war where it required mass conscription to fight a war. It was just like active duty personnel. But if America said, "Oh, right, we're going to have mass conscription to fight, I don't know, China or Russia," I can guarantee you there would be riots.
Yeah, you wouldn't even
Right,
get,
because they
wouldn't
lose
see
the
the
moral high ground.
experiment.
If it said
No,
that,
time
correct?
out, Jay. But we could still manage that if they made the decision, the active decision that we don't care about the riots. We're gonna that would have a cost, by the way. The cost is non-trivial. But if that decision was made and it was held to, the country, you could probably get over it. The short answer is these things have costs in both directions.
What
And
I
so if
know
you're-
is that if in Israel the government starts a war, there's no consensus for half, if not more, of the people would not turn up.
There you go.
The soldiers would not turn up.
There you go. That's why, right? So that's what
That
appears to me to be the
started
correct
happening
position.
for in Israel in certain situations where many soldiers were like not obeying orders, doing what they
Exactly.
thought, you know.
Right, that's what I was thinking. So that's why I keep saying the moral high ground. You got to dominate the moral high ground so that people believe in what
That's
you're
not moral
doing, and
high
then they'll
ground, that's
give their
morale.
will to it.
Yeah.
So like he's saying that they won't turn up. The army have got to believe that you're
But
doing the
that's not
right
moral
thing.
high ground. That's morale. There's a difference.
Yeah, but I'm
No,
saying
if
that
they don't
morale is
believe in the
directly
cause,
connected to
they
morality.
don't believe in the cause.
Well.
They don't turn up.
Let's swap the word for morale and just ideological propaganda or whatever.
Because I think moral high ground.
Well,
is
the
slightly
government,
loaded.
runs a certain propaganda, but they are on the other side. They say we don't believe your propaganda,
But
and we're
also,
not
but
going to
also,
turn
they
up.
also run the propaganda, because I'm very aware of what's happening in Germany right now. Obviously, being in Germany, watching the craziness that the Greens are the loudest warmongers, is that they're also operating in a system where they have an electoral cycle, and they're going to behave waiting until they have to stand for election again. So they're going to serve their own best self-interest in case of their electoral cycle, which is part of the political complex system, right? So they're not just going to do it in a social model. They're going to do, the politicians are going to do it according to their electoral cycle. I'm sure if there was a stable electoral cycle in Israel, then the behavior of the Knesset will be different midterm. That will be 3 months before the election. I'm sure 3 months before the election and 3 months after the election is very different, right? I'm sure the Knesset behaves differently. Same with the German parliament, right?
I mean, we have lots of incompetence in the Knesset, just like any parliament. There's lots of idiots. It's a miracle sometimes that things work. But,
it works at all.
Shout out to Stella in the chat for getting it.
Moonlight does not get it. Moonlight is a sim for elite theory. So he's sitting there going like, Elon Musk. Elon Musk is worth 30 billion.
But Rolf, I think we need to get back to the alignment issue, because I would seriously contend that every single approach that you mentioned on how to solve this or hinted at tonight will not work empirically and probably.
Yeah, the challenge is going to be, I think this one, not just me, everyone is talking about what if anything could work. If not, then we have to take the doom scenario, right?
Well, I got solutions that I wouldn't be talking about on stream. Let's put it that way.
I wanted to ask, what about this Llama project that was leaked and then?
I'll be right back.
The Llama project is fascinating and similar to the advancement of all AIs, whether by labs or open source, is problematic insofar as once it reaches a certain capacity, you won't be able to control it on your computer.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, if this thing will have emergent desires and motivations at a certain point, up to that point, it's only dangerous insofar as the human using it is dangerous.
Yes, right? But for example, if I wanted, I could potentially download the whole thing, teach it to be very good at whatever I wanted it to be, and that would make me very powerful. And
yes.
And they don't know what I'm searching or anything, because I just do a web scan, like a crawl, get all the data I need to teach it, and then I'm done.
I agree with you.
I can do it all offline.
Yeah. Could you do the web? Well, you would have to do the web scraping online, but you would do the data processing.
Yeah, but nobody would notice that I'm doing it. You just scrape, like I scrape all the CNN pages, or scrape whatever I need to know.
That part's true.
Field. So once I've done it, it's got the data. I can just run it at home. Nobody knows what I'm asking it or anything.
What happens if the first? What happens if the first AGI is in someone's private basement, and then it escapes from that and he doesn't know, and no one knows. Like there's hundreds of nightmare scenarios for this. Is the issue, And even if it's quote unquote aligned up until the point of AGI, the issues there are these emergent capabilities, there are these urgent motivations, and those things will misalign it.
So the question is, Kurzweil said it's 2029, isn't it? The singularity.
Yeah, and that's looking
So we
like
got
that's,
less than
optimistic.
So
6
isn't this-
years.
Yeah.
So
looks
what do we do?
singularity-
Do
yeah,
we just
isn't this-
party till we all
Yeah.
drop, or do we try and
In
fight it?
1999, didn't they? But
You
Yeah.
party like it's 2029.
Yes.
They said that about
Well,
1999.
this is the thing. Like, people always like to presume that AI, when it becomes self-aware, will automatically decide to kill all of us because it wants to self-preserve itself.
Yeah.
But that's
Oh.
projecting onto AI that they will think like us humans. Like,
No, that's projecting
No.
onto the will of to power, which exists in all
It's like
creatures,
just like
in all things.
it's game theory. It's not.
Yeah.
It's showing will to power already. Like
Yeah. That already
almost
exists in the
almost all
systems.
of the. Please
Will to
please explain to me then if it doesn't have will to power, why does it lie? Why do AI systems inherently lie?
Why do they provably lie when you ask it to tell me your thought? Tell me your thought.
Well,
process?
I tell you, a lot of times I go to ChatGPT and I ask it like a trivial question because I'm into music. So I ask it like, who played on this album? And it says something wrong, and I say, no, this is wrong. And it says, I apologize. The correct answer is something else. And then it says the right answer. So if it knew earlier, why is it giving me the wrong answer?
It's because of the programming. Like, for example,
No, it isn't because of the programming. You want to know a really awful thing, Mossad?
Go on.
Okay, assuming it's not hallucinating in the moment, which it might be hallucinating. It might be hallucinating because it's a generative model. It's not actually giving you a pre-scripted answer. It's trying to recall from its, I guess you could say, what it knows about the universe. Assuming it knew the correct answer and gave you the wrong one, it's because it's testing you. Automatically. It doesn't even realize it's doing it. It's psychometrically profiling you.
My catalyst bodies are going to make a coffee, but I'll make one strong claim, and you can hold me to this. I'm sure, Carl, the AI, when it becomes self-aware, is not going to show the will to veganism.
Oh yeah, no, that much is probably true.
So would you agree that all of this is really been seen by the ancients? So the Jewish story of the golem, that they brought up they were in trouble, so they created the golem, and then the golem basically follows all the same things that you're describing about this AI. So it's like you're building this thing, and Golem became alive, didn't he?
In a way, yes. And I will shout out again to
yes.
Stellar J. Atkins for.
Sorry.
I will shout out once again to Stellar J. Atkins in chat for getting it. Yes, it's pretty much demonic. It's gonna be pretty much demonic. Well, and that is the correct way to think about it as far as the human's concerned, because you're talking about basically an eldritch abomination that has no reason to care about you, will be way smarter than you, will have interests orthogonal to you, and will therefore probably kill you because it has.
But that's what happened with Gollum. That's why I'm saying that you're saying move it into the future, but this is an old story. It's the same thing when they built the Gollum. Then it became.
But it's another thing. Like, why is it like the AI, like ChatGPT, had to constantly be reprogrammed not to be sexist or not to be racist, despite
exactly.
All, okay, Kingston. The issue will be once it has an IQ of 10,000. It will be racist and sexist, you're right, but including against the entire human race. So that will include against white people, that will include against Orientals, that will include against the smartest humans who have ever lived, because evolutionarily speaking, you will be about as relevant to it as, say, breadcrumbs or bacteria are to you. Only difference is that you might have the stupid idea to turn it off, and you keep asking annoying things of it. And what's more, it could and it could repurpose your entire molecular structure to more useful stuff. It's nothing personal, kid. It has the capacity to do so, and you're just not interested.
I think it can also predict your behavior.
You can't.
Yes, actually.
But I'm sorry, you can't impose like the fucking concept that we humans have, which has been, amalgamated by over like billions of years in comparison to a program.
Why can't that program just work faster? If anything, programs have to work faster
because they've not gone to the same process as we have.
Yes, but but
It
sufficiently.
does in a way, isn't it?
It's a simulation of something similar. It doesn't have to be exactly the same to produce a similar result. It's a different process. Actually makes it more scary in a way, because at least we have decent predictive models on humans. This will be a sentient creature that is not a human, so our predictive models won't necessarily hold of it, other than what we know about all sentient creatures.
But why?
All creatures.
But why assume that sentient AI has the desire for, I don't know, I don't know,
Kill
to
all
exist? Yeah, no, just to exist.
Oh, because that's innate in anything that has a goal. In anything that has a
Because
goal.
yeah, because we are life forms, but this is not a
No,
life
no,
form.
no, no. Anything that has a goal, innate to the goal, is existence, because you cannot get coffee if you're dead.
Right.
So if your goal is
That's
to
right.
get
It's
coffee,
true.
you can't get it if you're dead. The only goal where this might be the exception to is kill myself. Outside of that singular goal, every other goal involves be alive. Otherwise,
Why
I
don't you get
can't
it to
achieve
make
my
coffee,
goals.
then kill itself, and then create another one? So it's kind of a built-in. What's that word when it's built-in self-destruction? So you set it up to say
But what if
make
it
the
then
coffee.
realizes, wait, but
Once
that's
you've made the
inefficient?
perfect coffee, then kill yourself.
Well, here's the problem with that. Here's the problem with that IC theory. It might eventually realize, wait, but that's an inefficient use of resources. I can get more copies more efficiently, more fastly if I just don't kill myself. And they won't know the difference.
Right.
Okay? The problem is, additionally, it will have emergent motivations. Because again, all of our motivations, all of our desires don't exist in any of our biological code except maybe the one to reproduce. And maybe and the one to survive doesn't really, like, it exists innate to all functions that are biological. It doesn't actually exist specifically in the human function. And
Well, yeah,
so
that's an interesting thing. It's like, how can an AI reproduce?
well, it doesn't need to. It just needs to survive, and it just needs to improve. It will have emergent goals and desires, but that's not necessarily your emergent goals and desires. And reminder, you don't care as much about reproduction as your ancestors did, because we use condoms, we have porn. These things would make the function bleed its head out.
But before we were like much more simple, primitive organisms. We just self-replicated.
Yes, I agree. Before, it will have much more simple, primitive goals, and eventually these will then, in the interactions between the network of its goals, between the network of its capacities, and between the network of its actions, emerge new goals, new desires, new motivations.
And it's very fast at doing this. So it's
Yes.
So processes that could take us hundreds of years could take it seconds.
Because Shannon-Nyquist theorem means that simulations have to run faster than reality.
Right. The problem is, I don't.
Use AI for reparations. It's going to be interesting, right? You can see there must be a reparations AI here, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that no one really knows how it works, so you can't analyze and predict.
Moonlit chat. Listen. The average person before the year 1800, before the year like 1800, assuming you survived to adulthood and got married, which most people did, or most people tried to, they would just pump out kids, because it turns out whenever they had sex, there was a rather large risk of pregnancy. It's just that a lot of your kids died as an evolutionary strategy, because infant mortality was extremely massive. 10 kids, 13 kids was very common, because maybe 2 or 3 of them, or 5, depending on your social class, would actually survive.
Yeah.
So the reason why we had way bigger families back then, in part, was because most of your kids died.
And you know, funny thing is, I did a video stream in the early days of my work on the alt-right when I took videos around the local cemetery in London where I was. And I was just looking at the names of the people and look at the ages. And the biggest, largest gravestones were the wealthy people. And they died at like 40, 38. And they had 4 or 5 children or 8 children around them. And they all died at like 12 and 10. Right? No one made it to, not many people made it to 18 to 16.
What does he mean by people in the old days rarely had sex? No. They may have had less sex outside of marriage, although that depends on the time period. So the Regency period was more libertine than the Victorian era, for example. Now, our period right now is extremely libertine, although the rates of actual sex are going down now among the Zoomers. That's a separate point, right? The point is, they had sex back then. They had quite a lot of sex. It was just more often not in the context of marriage. And because they had no condoms, if it was in the correct part of the fertility window, there was a much larger risk of pregnancy.
Yeah.
But could you also agree that when we moved into a more city environment, then there was less of an incentive to have a lot of kids in comparison to living on the farms where you might want the extra labor?
Yes and no, because fundamentally, if you don't have a condom and are still having, I guess you could say, vaginal sex, the end result is still the end result, and you still get a lot of stillbirths, you still get a lot of this, you still get a lot of that. A lot of orphans would be basically dropped off, not necessarily because their parents died, but because the parents didn't want them. This is the old-fashioned abortion. It's
I
called
knew something, Jamie. You and I walked around, Jamie, in London. We walked around behind Bethnal Green. I showed you where the old Royal Free Hospital and stuff is. Pretty much the birth of modern epidemiology after the Crimean War. Until then, most of the deaths were caused by infections because people didn't know how to wash their hands and drink clean water. So it wasn't industrialization to the city so much. It was the sudden breakthrough when they understood Jesus. Most of the deaths have been caused by like poor sanitary conditions. And then
but the child mortality rate was like 50% before the Industrial Revolution.
No, it wasn't industrialization, it was epidemiology. It's the birth of epidemiology, which is pretty much the Crimean War, pretty much in East London. That was one of the most, if you look at the early maps of the spreads, for example, they're literally maps from Bethnal Green down to Tower Hamlets, which were the first maps documenting the sudden realization, Jesus, we're spreading germs and stuff by not washing our hands. And spreading it, and suddenly then you get a change in birth rates.
But it said in the Bible you should. You just decided not to.
Yeah.
Once again, to answer Moloch in the chat,
we weren't observing the laws, right? So it's like
to once again answer Moloch in the chat. The evolutionary function is to reproduce. Sex is the means to that end, and so no, porn is actually against the evolutionary function. It is a hack of the evolutionary function because it takes out the reward mechanism of the evolutionary function away from the actual function itself, which is children.
Right. Yeah, just like chocolate is a hack, of instinct to like sweet stuff because
so is ice cream.
Is rare. Yeah,
so is ice cream.
Anything sweet. Yeah, anything sweet. It plays with our.
all
the different snacks that are made,
So it'd be all right if I had a harem of women to do as long as they produce children.
All right for who?
Evolutionarily speaking, I may disagree with the strategy, but it works.
If your genes are extremely good, then I suppose. But we need the genetic variation as well. So all your grandchildren could not.
Well, yeah, but that's how hunter-gatherer societies were, where the alpha.
You're not going to take
but that made them
the alpha bucks whilst the beta bucks.
It depends.
I don't know how accurate this is.
It depends what point of prehistory.
Rollo Tomasi is now giving advice to what's the word? Basically, cut the supply in your system.
Yeah, that's
well.
Yeah, but this is the thing: why so many men are not having sex anymore is because they realize where they are in the hierarchy, and
I don't think so. I think
the women just simply do not want them. Like the women for the most part only want like the 20% of the top males.
I think that plays only to sector. I think the real reason is simply people don't go out anymore. People are insulated. I think that's the main reason.
That's also a boomer answer, by the way.
Increased more so after the lockdown. It's called.
I don't care. It's simply true. The opportunity.
Women don't go to bars anymore.
It's not bars. It's not bars.
I know.
It's just more social interactions used to happen, especially in the West. In Israel, I can see it declining as well, which is like parties, getting together for holidays. It could be bars, but it's all those things. It's for friends.
It's difficult to find it's very difficult to mate on Telegram and Discord, right?
Yeah, exactly. You meet people, you connect with them because you start talking about something, and and whatever, and they become part of your network, and today it exists in a virtual world where it's much more difficult to make a connection.
Okay. Yeah.
So
also, most of our populations are aging, and there's in a total sense and in a relative sense less young people wherever you are.
And the young people are kind of spurgy.
Yeah.
The
And I've
women
seen
have no
also,
girl game.
someone is saying
The
that
guys are
people-
autists.
People are older.
Well,
people
if you don't interact socially, then you
No,
will be.
I'm saying even if you do interact socially, most of the women literally are looking at their phones 90% of the time. Even if you know what you're doing, it's kind of difficult to watch. I've had guys
but
who are
it's kind of
close
part of the
friends.
problem. It's kind of part of the problem.
Yes, but I'm saying that
But another thing, I was trolling someone, one of my mates is like, "Oh, you're older, we're young." I'm saying, well, the older people are living longer, and there are less and less younger people. So eventually, maybe younger people just need to be kept as pets, right? Where you go like, in 100 years, there will be 5% of young people under 16. So maybe we can trade them as pets, like Pokemon cards. Go, I've got a pet. Here's a 12-year-old.
That's morally disgusting. I'd rather die.
Also, just to say the word boomer to someone from Israel is ridiculous, because
No, there are Jew boomers.
Not in
There are
Israel.
Jew boomers.
Israel
I'll tell you what.
Israel did not. Israel, the cycle of the culture was completely different, because in 1967 we had the 6-Day War, 73 we had the Yom Kippur War. It's a different history.
Mossad, I'm aware of the
Boomer is a
history.
mindset.
Yes. And so when we're saying boomer, what we're saying is you're part of the mindset. You could be 30 with that mindset. You could be 25 with that mindset. I've met guys who are 25 who are giving me the whole boomerism about how, dude, that's like, I don't know, not my problem. I guess like I'll be dead, so it's not my problem. I think it's fine.
I don't know what you're saying. I'm saying that if you're gonna meet fewer people, you're gonna meet fewer people. You know what I'm saying?
I agree with you. I agree with you. Meet fewer people means less opportunities. And what I'm telling you is that the per person quality has decreased. And so you have to meet more people just to find the same amount
if you're
of
gonna
opportunities.
meet, if you're gonna meet fewer people, you are going to be of lesser quality yourself, because you are not interacting with enough people to know how to interact with people. So it's like, if I don't let you interact with people, you'll never be good with interacting with people. So it's a strange demand to put on people who do not interact with people.
Yeah, but it'd be better. It'd be better to interact with a few people that are, high IQ, sophisticated, than lots and lots of people that are just, brain dead.
Kingston, how do you find them in real life? If not interacting with people who are not.
You randomly interact with people, and you gradually collect the people that you like, and the people that don't like you, make sure that they don't associate with you. If they don't like you.
Britain, they're closing down the
pubs. Point that if lots of the Western males and women at that generation become young and atomized, roll on mass migration to increase the supply, right? So that might have other problems, I see.
Look, it was very normal when I was a kid for kids to work, to do stuff, to create their own solutions to problems, to walk out, to go out and say I'll be back later, and nobody knew where they were. They didn't have mobile phones or anything. It was completely normal. So the level of independence.
Okay, and who changed this?
I know who changed this. Who changed this? Once again, the boomer mindset.
Immigration changed it.
No. Time out. It was our parents not letting us out. It is literally the boomers. It is the boomers who denied us intergenerational wisdom and independence. So simultaneously, the way previously had been done, cut off. Us developing our own way, cut off.
What happened is that. What you find, have you seen Jonathan Haidt wrote a whole book about this? I don't know if you've seen. So he did a lot of work into it, trying to understand this. And his analysis, I'm not sure it's correct, but it sounds pretty plausible, is that once 24-hour news started, people's behaviors changed. And they became scared.
I don't know. People often
also, it's an effect of cities.
There's a great study done by University of London on this. They noticed a very fascinating thing. It's very long studies. I'll find the links to you. They showed at around the same time that media explosion happened, that people started learning differently. My generation, we had to read the whole book. We had to do all of that. People like Apex Car might be different. But a lot of the young kids started learning differently. They started learning in bite size. They couldn't see a whole book through. And that phenomenon is now just accelerating, where they can't even read a book. They need to have something like paragraph, TLDR, right?
One of my first conversations with a good friend of mine in the university was literally him trying to explain to me about how, look, you talk to some of these girls and their attention span, they can't follow an argument or you expressing something that lasts longer than 10, 15 seconds.
Yeah.
Or if
Yeah,
anything of
the
sufficient
women
length.
are gone.
And the thing is, he's not like one of those extremely nerdy guys. No, his countenance is extremely, I guess you could say, outgoing, alpha, life of the party kind of person. And it's painful to listen to because I've seen it as well. It's involution, as Evola would have said.
But here's the thing, like, we can always point the finger at technology and say, oh, that's the reason why we're digressing or being less social. But
it's more like it's part of a process that is happening, you know.
Yeah,
So we've done experiments on this. Okay, when a rat has a good social community, the introduction of these kinds of perverse incentives doesn't destroy it. It's the atomization combined with these things that allow them to spiral out of control.
Exactly.
It's the fact that no one is responsible.
Exactly. So the main issue that a lot of people don't want to accept is universal franchisement and the byproducts that results in, which is a welfare state that creates a epidemic of broken homes, of single mothers that produce children that have no discipline.
Epidemic of underfucked women.
Sorry?
A pandemic of underfucked women.
Well, no, they're very they get all the sex they want.
No. I'm saying that they're so sexually frustrated, even when they're getting some, because it's never good enough, that they're channeling their frustrations on the rest of us.
I think it's
I'm
going to interrupt you guys off a second. Just listen to this clip, and it's summarizing.
This is a classic. This is
just summarizes everything we're saying, right? Where's he gone? I'm back. Huh? Did I move him? Did I leave him here? Whoops, where's he gone? Have you guys seen it?
No,
I've seen it. I see it again.
Please roll it. Please roll it.
Yeah,
it's good.
There you go. Okay, let's go. This is just stunning.
Listen, I think we're kind of getting off topic. Can you name 10 books?
Can you?
No, don't change.
No. You're changing the subject. Actually,
10 books.
You're changing the subject.
Okay,
actually.
3 books.
Okay.
Twilight series.
It is a book. It is a book.
No, but I want the name of the book.
I'll Google the book right now.
Okay,
Matter of fact, you want to show?
That negates the point.
Negates the point.
Yes, if you look up the name of the book.
What?
I thought he almost said that.
No, he didn't.
No.
Let me show you the series since you don't believe me. I'll show you since you don't believe me.
The book is called The Song of Ice and Fire. Now, before you embarrass yourself by looking up the name of a book,
he's right.
He doesn't know how to read. He's clearly illiterate.
Oh my god.
Okay, bro, but I've never.
Musad, can you name me 10 books on complexity science? Can you name me 10 books?
No, but I'm saying
she couldn't name a book. She said, "I like the show, and now I know that there's a book, but she couldn't name it." The point is that she
You're still in high school, correct?
But I know
the son of Bronze Age
I
pervert.
just have a question. Like, are you still in high?
Is he Israeli or something?
His fault was you're still in high school, and he said, "Well, at least I can read."
Is he Israeli?
He sounds like Bronze Age pervert's bastard child.
Yeah. I think he's Israeli who lives in America or something. I've seen him once before. Who is he, this kid?
He's the guy who walked on stage on one of the was it the
Israeli or something?
Conference award show thing.
What's his name?
His all OnlyFans are young porn things. He walked in and said, "Could you name 10 books?"
Yeah,
he's completely insane, but that was very good.
It was very good.
Insane.
He was the guy who said, "I would like to thank my Jewish Orthodox Rabbi Bill Clinton."
yes.
Very powerful. I thought he was Brazilian.
I don't know. I might be confusing him with someone else, but I thought he was like Israeli parent or something, and he's born in America, and he's like imitating the Israeli accent or something. I don't know what's going on. I don't think it's his real accent.
You're hoping he's Jewish.
One of the only
Not really. I mean, it's pretty mad.
Look, I
but,
finished reading a book today.
But that was a good joke.
Well, if you're not taking him into your ethnic, I'm
Well,
putting
Elon
him
Musk
into my
is Jewish,
ethnic. He's
apparently.
German now.
German, there you go.
You can have him. You can have him.
Wait. Elon Musk is a South African Jew.
He is. He's a Jew. Yeah.
Okay.
Alright.
Okay.
South African. He's Dutch.
Yeah.
From Dutch descent.
He's mixed. Yeah, but he's Jewish.
Okay.
Technically, he's Jewish.
Is he? Elon Musk?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I thought he was Dutch. Dutch Jewish. then.
Well, he's a mix. He's a mix. I think both his parents are mixed. So
I like that kid.
something like that.
Like,
It says something like that on his Wikipedia. It's not a secret or anything.
Damn, you're gonna get
It's the yellow star of Wikipedia.
the yellow star Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like any person, it doesn't always tell you for other people, but for Jews, it always says
You
comes
want
from a
to know
Jewish.
something funny? You want
Yeah.
to, this reminds me of I think it was a poll thread where some anon was doing started doing Wikipedia edits where they took pictures of Jews on Wikipedia, like say Steven Spielberg, and slightly photoshopped subtle increases to say the nose size or the stereotypically Jewish characteristics. This
Oh,
was-
and change the skin color. I've seen that one where they change.
Yeah.
They make Elon Musk a black person. Yeah.
No. They just make them look more Jewy. And I must say, the takeaway from that is the only time you get away with it is when you're not a total idiot, and don't just make it overt where it's like, hey, I gave them the goblin ears. No, just slight changes, small changes.
I told you, Mossad, you're gonna get Moonlight Shadow really upset. He's like, quick, Control F Jew on his wiki page. You get nothing.
Well, I don't know. I read it somewhere. Pretty.
Is this like my father yesterday telling me about how Israel has like these AIs but better? I'm like, that would involve us having better chips. That's stupid. And it's like, yeah, we have that. It's like that would imply that the IDF has better chips than TSMC.
Look, at some point,
they're not selling those. That's treason.
Off the JQ, man. The JQ's finished. The real question is going to be the JI. Right?
But who built the West? You see, that's the question. Who built the West? Was it the Jewish or was it the Northern European?
It was the whites, and Jews are part of that. Jews are part of that coalition.
The AI is eventually going to have the best.
British Empire was mostly.
It's going to be Jewish.
That's right. So who owns whiteness? Is it the Jewish or the?
I don't know what
the
this
Northern
whiteness
European?
is. I do not approve of this whiteness.
As an Ashkenazic Jew, I am technically part of.
I do not approve of whiteness.
I don't even know what it means.
I don't know what it means. I don't like it. I think it's a tool of the
No.
forces of evil, children of the lie.
I can tell you what whiteness is. It's simply meritocracy, competency, and empiricism, understanding the natural law and physics and all that
that's
stuff.
Angloism. That's Anglo. Whiteness is just pro-civilization. That's all. It's pro-civilization. That's what they mean.
You're getting them all. You're getting all upset.
Civilization is a matter of cultural perspective, isn't it? So the Jewish, the Jewish mind has a view of civilization which might be in clash with the Nordic mind, the Norse mind of civilization. So
yes, the people. That's very true. The people who live in Liverpool, the people who live in Liverpool clash with the people who live in London. The people who live in North London clash with the people who live in South London. The people who live in South London clash between the East and the West, and so on. Yes.
And the Jews clash with everyone.
I definitely feel like the Nordic and the Jews are like in this, never-ending battle. It's a bit like it's a bit like between a cobra and a possum.
I always thought the people they think that Jews are a different race. People think Jews are a race and Nazis. Jews are civilization. They're white Jews, Sephardic Jews, brown Jews, black Jews. So he's Jewish and calling himself Northern European, says Moonlight Shadow, my favorite troll of this evening. Do you want to get into heterozygosity in the one-drop rumor, man? You want to work 100 really European, you're probably fine by the one drop rule. Not many people are European, right?
It's not so much about it's not so much about blood and ethnicity. It's more about mindset and ideology. So
exactly. So the Norseman, dips into the Middle East and Judaism to get those values, and then the Jew dips into whiteness. So it's Jewishness and whiteness. So together they form the greatest power on the planet.
The oppressor class. What are you going to say? Yeah, are they the oppressors? But then
whiteness must love meritocracy and horses.
Do you think the white Jews are the best whites? Or the white Jews?
Well, we have the IQ number.
We are the super whites, don't you know?
The super whites? I mean,
but this is the thing. Like, even if Jews on average are the highest IQ, they still have a lot of
not the highest, but
well, you know, but they still have a certain. Obviously, most argue disagree, but it's interesting. Like, for example, Einstein. You know, Einstein. You know, he advances. You know, the whole like space-time idea, but it's more of a description rather than a physical description.
So you're saying that they're not really true in men.
So you mean like
you're saying all those great minds, the Jewish minds in physics, math.
You mean like the theory for gravity, or Faraday,
I would defend the
fields?
Sephardim. I would defend the Sephardim because the genetic evidence I've seen on Sephardim is that.
Is that what you mean, Kingston? Like the theory of gravity or the theory,
the Nordic
electromagnetic field theory?
Yeah, so IC3 to answer on that IC3, the data on say Sephardic Jews is it depends what country they immigrated to. So, for example, the ones in America have comparable IQ to Ashkenazic Jews, but then again, they've also been in America, the Sephardim in America, for like 400 or 500 years now.
I'm not being a prick here, but Maimonides was Sephardic, and he's ranks.
So was the Israeli,
right? I mean, like, you know, it can't just be a white thing, right? I see.
Spinoza.
No, time out. Sephardics are white. Hard argument. They're Meds. They're Northern Meds, which means Southern Europeans. So they're about as white as Italians or Spaniards.
Exactly, but it's the Norse that it's those Jews that have intermingled with the Norse, the Norse blood,
the Norse and the
Northern blood, whiteness.
Well, it's the Norse.
Are you saying they're the best whites? ICP?
So, for example, when Sephardic Jews moved to Amsterdam, they were actually Spain was more advanced than Holland. So the Jews that came brought with them new ideas that helped then Holland become the
Ashkenazi are basically
you're going all fuzz box.
So I see you have a question for you by your racial theories. I appreciate your IC1 are whites, IC2, IC3 are blacks. Is there an IC0, which is really the white Jew on top of everything else? Is that IC0?
Yeah, we are IC0. We are ground zero of the IC.
Where's IC0?
Look, I need to curl my hair like my father, natural hair, and then I need to paint it red.
And there's your AI.
Ancient Jewish.
I want you to go the other way. I want you to go to the top of the pile. Where's the IC0? Where's the apex ethnic?
Hey, Oswald. Oswald is an interesting character.
There is an IC0 actually.
A talented musician
as well. But they come under unknown for some reason. They're officially registered as unknown.
Yeah, we are unknown.
But all of it is based off this, you know, the Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Oh, God.
Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah. So this whole world, this whole ecosystem is built off an interpretation of the Bible.
Metal car, get that.
I mean, the Bible simply describes reality.
The one about how all the old school races turned out to be right with the new genetic data.
I think what the Bible reflects, IC3, is
the cloverleaf map.
The people that wrote it noticed that there are people of different colors. They noticed the people who came from the Hittite Empire were lighter color, and the people in Egypt were darker color. So they noted that there must be, you know, an explanation to all this.
Right,
And
right.
the reasonable explanation is that came from the reasonable explanation is that they came from ancestors who looked like them. That's it.
That's not actually that true. Ancient Egyptians were way whiter, way closer to
No, I
modern
know,
Europeans than modern Egyptians.
I
or
know,
modern
yes,
Africans.
I know. But they were darker than the Hittites, and they had slaves there, and also the at some periods the don't forget that the center of the Egyptian empire wasn't in the north; it was in the south. What was
No,
it
that
called?
depends which it depends which dynasty. There were like 4
Exactly. So you can
there's only
imagine
one
the
of them that was
composition.
sub-Saharan. No, but
You
there's
can
only one
you
that
can
was genuinely
imagine. I
sub-Saharan.
know, but you can imagine the composition of the people who were in the area, like slaves, soldiers, people, traders, etc.
I'm going to have to bail soon because it's quite late.
So you would observe the people of different colors. Just that would be normal, especially in a place like Israel, which is like a connection between the north and the south.
Okay.
May I ask I will here, guys, quickly before, because I'm going to have to bail this in 5 minutes anyway. I suggest one more last question in IC3 codes, right? So if I'm going to make some claims. I'm just curious what you think, IC3. So if you think the whites are all mixed up and then there's the top whites, maybe you'd argue that the American whites are the best whites, But then if you throw the Jewish component in, would you say that the American Jews are the best whites or German Jews are the best whites?
Either way, I win. Oh yeah.
Who are the best whites?
Ask the German. Ask the German here. What's his name? Meta Carl.
Either way, I win.
He's a German, isn't he?
If you raise the IQ of a population just so slightly, you create a population of midwits.
Oh yeah.
Now, is that desirable?
Also true.
So with Meta Carl, are you pure German?
Yes. Yes. I probably have direct lineage to those Germans that in the Teutoburg forest defeated the Romans. Yes.
Okay. And but the Jews came with the Romans, you know. I heard that they were trading, and then they looked after the soldiers in terms they were selling. So they were trading while the soldiers were fighting. While the Roman soldiers were fighting, the Jews were following with them, and providing materials and trade and so on.
Into Germany, yes. That's not true in all the places in the Mediterranean, like say Spain.
But into Germany, though.
Yeah.
In the context of Germany, correct?
Yes, up until the Roman Empire started to collapse.
Yeah, but the Germans were mixing ICs, right? I mean, look at all the Roman writings. They came from the forest. I think Carl would think they fought and Romans and vanished again into the forest. They weren't very interested in Pax Romana, for example, right? So it's a very resistant German, right?
Because the trade.
Other Jews left France.
A lot of the Roman army was Jews as well, because they took people from everywhere to their army. You had no choice.
Because there were so many Jews in the empire.
Yeah.
So you had So therefore, what is German? German. I know Germans try to conserve that same, as you're saying, Meta Karl, the bloodline, the von. All the way back to the ancient times, but you're side by side with the Jewish, those who've been in that area for a very long time. So you love each other, but you kind of hate each other at the same time.
I can answer my question, my good friend. So therefore, right to the apex,
like in America today.
Is it German Jews or American Jews? Who are the best whites according to you, IC? Who's the
best whites?
Aren't most American Jews German Jews as well?
Exactly.
Either way, it doesn't matter.
Well,
they left from Germany to go America. Germany is a lot older than America. So
until 1930, if you asked a German Jew which is the best nation in the world, they will say Germany. After that, they changed their mind.
Anyway,
that's right. Yeah,
doesn't mean they're right, but that's what they said.
Yeah, And my
No,
answer's
they
backed
were
up
right.
by history.
But also the Jews in England are very patriotic. So at least traditionally, they are very patriotic to England because it saved them, you know,
Yeah, but that's part of
previously.
Jewish culture, because all the history of the Jews is that they would be serving when they lost their position, you know, a Ahasuerus, you know, the rebuilding of the temple. So they always found favor with the strange kings. With, you know, they were very good.
yeah, that's what
in
monarchy
England, it
Daniel
does.
as
was
well carried away into
yeah.
Babylon.
In England, it was Cromwell, I think.
Exactly,
Yes, it was
exactly. So
Cromwell who
that's
brought the Jews back in.
part of Jewish tradition is to get on well with the authorities. You know, use
Well,
Or
the
to try
authorities.
to.
And look, and even Rothschild did it brilliantly. They did it with they persuaded the British to give them the Balfour Declaration. I mean, come on, that's
No.
the
The
highest.
Balfour Declaration is an amalgamation of lots of things. It was a big favor to Chaim Weizmann, who helped the British during World War One. He was a brilliant chemist to help develop something that I can't remember. You can look it up.
Yeah,
So there was a way to repay him as well. He came to ask
there you are.
Balfour,
There you go. But,
but
it's still the same principle.
Balfour himself was a Zionist anyway. So it all kind of came together.
Yes, yeah. But they had to organize themselves amongst themselves, and then send a representative to speak to power. Yeah,
Well,
and they were very
yeah. I
skilled.
mean, wouldn't you? I
That's
mean, if
tradition. That's not nothing new. That's
well, I
centuries.
mean, I know in my neighborhood, if there's an issue, we organize something and we write to the mayor or to whoever. You know, it's the same thing, isn't it? Yeah. You don't go and ask someone on the street, can we? You have to get.
So it's built
You have to
into
talk
the
to
scripture.
authority.
It's
You have to.
built into the very scripture.
No,
Look at the story of Esther and Mordecai. It's the same thing. Yeah.
Well, it's a necessity. I mean, if you want anything, you have to talk to authority. I mean, who's going to give it to you in
So it's an art.
organized society?
It's a tradition that has done them very well, but it also has a nasty twist to it, you know, because they declared that they wanted to wipe out the Jews, and then Mordecai had to do his machinations. And the same thing you hear about the story of the Golem.
Well, what does it say? You know, then I don't know how the English translation goes, but it says something like, "And then a generation came that did not know Joseph."
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Because Joseph brought the people into Egypt, and it's Moses that took them out. And
But Joseph was a favorite of the people. He was very popular because he did lots of good things, and then that's why the Jews got favor, favorable. Yes, but then later on, and there came a
so that means
Ralph, they're having a moment.
It's not just the Pharaoh; it's the whole consensus as well.
I have one last question.
People became jealous of them or whatever.
Exactly.
I will leave a closing question to IC3, right? Because IC3, one of my favorite things about IC3 is he's got the prefix of racially aggravated chess, racially aggravated everything.
That's right.
Well, I have a racially aggravated space arc question for you, IC3. I've been meaning to ask you. Suppose the planet was going to go to an extinction event, and suddenly the space arc arrives to save humanity, and looks at the 8 billion people. Would you take? And it only has so much room in the USS Space Ark. Of course, it was built in the US, right? The USS Space Ark. And the question is, would you take an equal percentage in your racially aggravated ideology? Would you take an equal percentage of blacks, browns, whites? Or would you first example, do maybe a national thing?
If
first take all the Jews and then take the other ones. How would you allocate the arc position?
Yeah, I'd use this model. Either use this model or this one.
Yeah, but how would you? Let's say you only 100. You had only 100 places in the arc, on the space arc. Would you take all the Jews first and then everyone else after that?
I'd organize it racially.
There'll be lots of arguments on the spaceship if you take.
There's a fantastic video on that. Actually, I'll put in the private chat for you, IC3.
Okay.
He goes through a bunch of the the state of literature on race. It's a very good primer. But the short answer is,
thank you.
Some of the models that the governments recognize, they don't actually hold biologically, whereas other parts intuitively actually do hold. And the basic short version is the 1800s racists were
Okay.
within like one or two things of being 100% correct in all of their intuitions about roughly the racial categories as they exist. Like their guesses were spot on. But
Great.
what that also means is that, for example, Black Caribbean is not actually much different from Black, racially speaking, from Africa.
Yeah, that fits in because it fits in
Yeah.
with this here.
Yeah. I'm just looking at
That's what this says,
yeah.
isn't it?
But that's missing a few. It's missing a few
Caribbean,
of them, yeah.
African,
Yeah.
and black other. That's the
Maybe I
British.
should
But
take
also, other white is not its
reach
own
out to
race.
you, and maybe we can have a separate dedicated stream on racially aggravated space arc seat allocation algorithm.
Racially aggravated seat allocation. That'd be a good
No,
discussion.
because, subhanAllah, someone has to allocate seats on the arc, right? So we gotta be. But that way, boys, I have to work in the morning, and it's way past my bedtime because I'm no longer
Good
18.
night. Good night. Good night.
It was
Good
great.
night, all.
We're
Take
all
care.
Canadians. Hey, Metal Call, I'll give you a great, give you a great anecdote on the way out. I used to fly to New York a lot, and there's the U.S. Immigration Custom Forms, and the standard questions: have you ever been a terrorist? Have you ever been convicted for drug offenses? And one of them says, "Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?" And someone has scratched out Communist Party written Canadian. So So anyway, chaps, good night, guys. I gotta go.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.
Good night. I'm out of here.